Yeah, good morning and welcome to this Dorset Police and Crime Panel meeting, looking at Q1 of the Police and Crime Commissioner's report to the panel. Mark, could I ask you to do item 1, please?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Chair. So I'll just introduce everybody. I'll go around, first of all, the members of the panel. If I could ask that everyone could just introduce themselves. I'll then go to the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, and then lastly to officers of the council. So first of all, in terms of the members of the panel, Councillor Dove.
Good morning. I'm a councillor for BCP Council and also the vice chair of the panel, lead cabinet member for equalities.
Thank you. Councillor Barrow.
Morning all, I'm Councillor Pete Barrow, represent the Rallypole ward in Weymouth, and I'm a member of Dorset Council.
Thank you. Councillor Farquhar.
Yes, good morning all. Councillor George Farquhar. I represent Boscombe East and Folkestone ward, which is in the east of Bournemouth, and I'm the lead member for putting victims and communities first.
Thank you. And Councillor Fry.
Good morning, Councillor Les Fry, representing Dorchester West.
Thank you. Councillor Haynes.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Councillor May Haynes from BCP Council. I am the portfolio holder for community safety at BCP Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Howell.
Hello, Councillor Mark Howell, representing Poole Town ward in BCP Council.
Thank you. Councillor Jesperson.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Sherry Jesperson, representing Hillforts and Upper Tarrants ward in Dorset Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian McVie.
Morning, Ian McVeigh, one of the two independents on the panel.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Good morning, Councillor David Taylor from Dorchester Town Council and also Dorset Council, representing Charlton St Mary and various other panels, particularly this one. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Councillor Trent.
Yeah, Councillor Tony Trent, BCP Councillor representing Alderney and Bourne Valley, Warding Pool.
Thank you. And we have apologies from Councillor Gorringe. So if I now move across to the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. So first of all, the Police and Crime Commissioner, David Sidwick.
How do you do? Good morning, Dave Sidwick, Dorset PCC.
Thank you very much. And Simon Bullock.
Good morning, everyone. Simon Bullock, the Chief Executive to the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Thank you. Adam Harold.
Good morning, everyone. Adam Harold, the Director of Operations for Police and Crime Commissioner.
Thank you. And Julie Strange.
Good morning, Julie Strange, Treasurer to the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Thank you. And in terms of officers of the council, you have myself. I'm Mark Hare. I'm the lead officer for the Police and Crime panel. And also we have Elaine Tibble. If you'd like to introduce yourself, Elaine.
Good morning, I'm Elaine Tibble. I'm the Senior Democratic Services Officer for Dorset Council.
Thank you very much. And I think that is everyone. Can I just check that I haven't missed anybody? Okay. Chair, if I may, could I just make a very brief statement?
Yeah, please do, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you. So it's just really to explain that this meeting is an informal one. So in light of the situation with COVID-19 case rates, Dorset Council Chief Executive Matt Prosser has exercised his delegated powers to continue to hold virtual informal committee meetings. So where a decision is required by the committee, the chair will invite members to express a minded to decision in respect to the recommendations set out in the reports, with the decision then being taken by an officer, a delegated authority, in the light of that minded to decision expressed by members in the virtual committee. So any decisions that are required will then be confirmed by that appropriate officer at the conclusion of the committee's debate on that agenda item. As such, the minutes of the last meetings won't be signed off today. The actions noted were primarily additions to the forward plan which have been made and will be discussed later on in the agenda. There's an outstanding item from a previous meeting for an update on alliance savings, which will be added into the forward plan and hasn't been added in yet, but will be post-meeting. Panel members also have been provided with the working definition of frontline policing. So the one outstanding item, therefore, is the OPCC report on the results of the e-scooter trial, which you may want to invite the PCC to comment on, Chair.
Yeah, Dave, would you like to just give us a brief update on your trial?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the issue around e-scooters, which has actually been the single item which I've had most correspondence about in the first quarter. Which is why I started asking the questions around what were we doing about e-scooters. It could be a transformative form of transport, but at this moment in time, legislation hasn't picked up with it. So the situation is that electric e-scooters outside of the Beryl e-scooter trial are actually illegal, except on private land. Those within the Beryl e-scooter trial are obviously legal, but not to be used on the pavements, not to be used two up, those sorts of situations. So in the first 8 months of 2021, what we've done is we've stopped more than 40 riders of privately owned e-scooters. So they've been stopped and spoken to before being issued with warnings, including signing an agreement to stop using their e-scooter illegally on public roads. 25 e-scooters have been seized, 11 for riding on public land without insurance, which is the issue, and 14 for having been involved in suspected criminal activity. In addition, what we've done is we've basically stopped those in the Beryl trial scheme who are also found riding on pavements or improperly. So that's where we are. It is an issue for the public, as I said. It is something where we need national legislation to catch up with it. And I hope that gives the panel some reassurance that we're looking at this.
Thank you very much for that, Dave. Moving on then, item 2, declarations of interest, Mark.
Yeah, so just really to invite panel members at this moment to make any declarations that are necessary to ensure compliance with the Code of Conduct. So if I just pause for a moment for any declarations that may need to be made. Okay, then no declarations then, Mike.
Thank you very much. Then moving swiftly on to item 3, public participation.
So we've had no questions from the public and no petitions.
Thank you very much for that. Which leads us nicely into item 4, firearms licensing. This is on the agenda due to the mass shooting that was in Plymouth. And the panel, on behalf of the people of Dorset, is seeking assurance from the PCC that firearms licensing in Dorset is fit for purpose and safe. Dave.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll take you through this and I'll do it in some detail so as we understand where we are. First of all, members be aware of the tragic events in Plymouth on the 12th of August, where Jake Davison shot and killed 5 people in the Keyham area of the town before fatally wounding himself. I'm sure that panel would join with me in sending our thoughts to the family and friends of Maxine Davison, Sophie and Lee Martin, Stephen Washington and Kate Shepherd, plus to the further 2 individuals who were also shot and wounded who have not been publicly named. The first thing I'd say, Chair, is that these mass shootings are incredibly rare. And indeed, this was the first incident of this type since the Cumbria shootings of 2010. The second thing to highlight is incredible police and partnership response to this horrendous incident. And then to offer our thanks to those officers, staff and volunteers who continue to put themselves in harm's way to protect us. We sent some of our Dorset officers in order to help out with the situation. And both I and the Chief Constable phoned our opposite numbers immediately after this happened to see what else we could do to help. So whilst it's premature to engage in debate around the possible motive for this senseless tragedy, and of course all this remains operational policing, the issue of firearms licensing is important to have been raised, and given the panel's previous scrutiny of this function, I thought I'd give you an overview of the work underway so far, because understandably also this has been my focus. So if I give you a bit of a background, it might be helpful to reiterate that firearms licensing is governed by the Firearms Act 1968 and its amendments, coupled with the Home Office Guide on Firearms Licensing Law from 2016. 4 firearms licensing functions are also subject to Dorset Police internal governance. They are inspected by the HMIC FRS and also to oversight by my office. It might also be helpful to explain to new members that firearms licensing went live as an alliance function across Dorset, Devon and Cornwall in 2017. The alliance unit receive and process all aspects of firearms and explosive licensing applications and renewals. So what this means is that the team undertake inquiries consisting of research, telephone-based, risk-based assessments, or indeed home visits. This then results in a recommendation whether or not a certificate should be issued or renewed. This is then reviewed by the Alliance Firearms and Explosives Licensing Manager, who makes a decision under delegated powers from the Chief Constable. In terms of my own activity, Chair, immediately following the shootings, the Chief Constable updated me on the high-level details of the incident and later provided a fuller briefing at the Joint Leadership Board. There are 3 related reviews that I'm linked into to a greater or lesser extent. The first is by the Independent Office for Police Conduct, and this is the usual referral and subsequent investigation that one would expect. This has confirmed the initial facts of the case, and obviously I can't comment on this, and I've got to allow it to follow due process until they're ready to release their findings. I will then clearly discuss this with the force. The second one is an internal review. This is led by the Assistant Chief Constables of both Devon and Cornwall and Dorset. This is largely focusing on the operational side of the business. And so I've played no role in this so far, but I'm expecting to consider these findings in due course. Thirdly, there is an external review, which is at the strategic level of Chief Constables and the PCCs of both forces, who have agreed an external peer review to take place to consider the degree to which current policies and processes within the Alliance Firearms Licensing Unit are compliant with national guidance and practices, together also with an assessment of how this policy is currently applied. So the review team will consider the vetting process, the management of risk, and the decision-making processes within the unit. As Dorset PCC, I was one of 4 signatories for the terms of reference for this peer review. I hope this was of help, Chair. I'm happy to answer questions, but clearly I can't comment on operational matters or indeed on the ongoing investigations or reviews. So I guess there's a limit to how much I'll be able to help with the questions.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that, Dave. Could you, if you are aware or if you know, what is happening at the national level following this incident?
Well, I'm aware that at the national level, the Home Office is taking a keen interest into this as well. Apart from that, I can't go into any details.
Okay, thank you for that. For your outline briefing, it was really useful, and hopefully will put the people of Dorset's minds at rest. So, Tony, you've got a question.
Yeah, I don't recall the exact figures, but I know when I read in the newspaper not long after that incident, the number of people that had firearm licenses in Dorset, I was shocked. I was actually struggling to think why that number of people would require a firearm. I can understand farmers having firearms and maybe people that are, you know, having shotguns, only basic stuff, and people who shoot as a sport. But beyond that, I really struggle to see why anybody should have the private ownership of a firearm. And I'm wondering whether there are any representations being made on that, because I think the number was horrendous.
Tony, can you just get to your question, please?
Well, the question is, are we actually doing anything, and could we actually confirm the number? Because I know I was shocked by it when I read it, and you know, should we perhaps be making representations through the Home Office that we should drastically reduce the number of licensed firearms everywhere? Because quite frankly, I cannot see any reason why most people should own a firearm.
Thank you, Tony.
So Tony, I think you've hit the nub of it there. We have a county which is, in area-wise, 2/3 rural, and as such, it is farmers. It is those people who shoot for a hobby. Those are the vast majority of the licenses that we've got. Now, I'll get you the exact number and reply to the panel with that. But regarding whether it is my job to say that we should have less firearms licensing, I think that's something that has to be done at a national level. My belief is that farmers need their shotguns in order to do their jobs. There will be other people in that area, and you know, I'm not going to legislate against people's sport if it's a legal sport.
Thank you, Dave. And also, you've highlighted to the panel that processes are in place in order to ensure that this horrendous incident is not replicated. Final question on this subject, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Morning. As you currently sit as the PCC, have you seen any need to allocate additional resources, i.e. funding, for the police to support them through an internal and external review, or are you quite satisfied that at the moment they have sufficient resource within their operational budgets to meet the demands that are now being placed on them by 3, I would think, quite extensive and in-depth inquiries?
So Ian, thank you for that. Yes, absolutely. I discussed that with the Chief Constable right at the start regarding the reviews and everything that was from resources. And at the moment, I am comfortable that we can basically work through what we've got to do.
I think it's an important point to make there, Chair, that as the PCC, in terms of providing the funding and resource to the Chief Constable, if he and his office are seeing that there's no need to do anything additional, we should also take comfort from that as well, I think.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian. Really good question, as always. Moving on to item 5, Police and Crime Plan update and response to panel feedback. At the last meeting, you presented your draft Police and Crime Plan. The panel took that away, reviewed it, and wrote to you with our, I would say, recommendations, but with our concepts and ideas on how it could be improved. You subsequently produced a report back to the panel, which the panel has now read. Could I ask you just to provide any verbal update on that briefing that you provided us to the panel? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I think I'll do is for the Dorset public who are watching, I'll basically go through the report and then I'll take questions on it. So the first thing I'll say is, if I may, I'd like to thank a couple of sets of people. One set of people is the panel themselves. We went out and consulted with a number of areas, and the panel were enthusiastic in their responses, which is what I would have expected. So I want to thank them for those responses, and we've taken note and actually adjusted the plan where necessary, and I'll go through that as we go through the report. The other set of people I'd like to thank is obviously the team in the OPCC. On May the 6th, when I was elected to office, they had a new beast to work with, and obviously a different philosophy, and they basically got together, got stuck in, and I'm very pleased that we're going to be able to publish this police and crime plan by the 31st of October, which is 5 months ahead of the deadline specified in the Act. So, you know, that's a credit to everybody who consulted on the plan and did so, but it's also a credit to my team for putting it together. So what does the plan cover? It covers, amongst other things, the police and crime objectives, which basically were distilled from the manifesto commitments that I had during the election. It also talks about the policing that the Chief Constable has to provide and the means by which that will be measured. The plan can be revised and reissued at any time. Now, one of the things I was very keen on is it was obvious that some things needed and could be done quickly, but some things in order to address policing and crime in Dorset would take longer. So in recognition particularly of this, but also because of the fact that I am operating with a 25% less time than the normal term of office, I set the plan to cover a longer period. So basically what I've done is I've really considered the views of the local community, but I've also got to have regard to the national picture, the strategic policing requirement. So the Chief Constable is also consulted on this plan. We've also taken cognizance of things like the National Beating Crime Plan, which came out towards the end of the consultation period. So what we've made certain is we've linked up the local needs of the people of Dorset with the national needs. So my vision very clearly is that Dorset should be the safest county in England and Wales. I believe we can get there by cutting crime and antisocial behaviour and by putting victims and communities first. And in particular, at this time, with the increase of resources that the force will be getting, the public quite rightly expects that. But this ambition also has to work with partner agencies. So basically, one of the things that I'm very keen on is that we make certain that we are joined up with people like the local authority. Your comments I was very grateful for. And thank you very much for the kind words that you said. You asked for a number of things. You asked for greater clarity on how the PCC will determine progress. And so further benchmarking information will be in the final version of the Police and Crime Plan. You also raised something else, which was something I saw as a slogan for the election. But I was delighted that you wanted me to include it in the plan. And that was to make police crime fighters again. So what I'd like to do about that is, I understand there's a question about that later. I'll cover that then. But what we have done is we've put some additional information in the plan around this statement. As we discussed, it was about the length of time of the plan. And you suggested that we actually extended it to 2028. And the reason for that is to allow a year's handover across a term of office.
29.
Sorry, 29, thank you. Yeah, so you suggested you extend it to 29. I'll also make the point that it may have to extend further, as I know that the PCCs generally, that's the totality of PCCs, are campaigning for the 4-year term to be reinstated. So I think we will definitely have the plan to 2029, but we'll have to see what happens regarding that situation. You asked about greater clarity and assurance in relation to the cost of the plan. Look, I believe that this is very affordable. I've had a lot of discussions with the force regarding the aspiration around the plan. And as part of our normal processes, it's going to be scrutinised. So I believe we're very much on course for this to be delivered by the end of October 2021. We've engaged with the public, Dorset Police, partner agencies. We've had our own consultation, which built on the 3 years I had as a candidate. So I think this plan actually does what it says on the tin, which actually will deliver for the people of Dorset according to their needs. And I look forward to sharing the final plan with Dorset's communities and working tirelessly to get that vision out there to make Dorset the safest county. So thank you very much. I did that at a canter, but I'm very welcome to take questions, and I'd ask members to note the report.
Thank you very much for that, Dave. And also, may I ask your staff, or can I ask you to thank your staff for the excellent report that was provided to the panel on this particular item. May.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for that report. And I welcome the fact that you had actually incorporated most of the feedback from the panel. So the question I have is really a general one, which is relating to ASB. Obviously, that has kind of on paragraph 2.5 slightly been pipped by violent crime, but is actually just by 0.1%, well, 0.1. But nonetheless, for myself, ASB is a priority. So ASB is subjective. What to one person may be tolerable to someone else isn't. So my question is, how would you ensure that if people witness ASB or what they perceive to be ASB, that it's actually properly reported? Because I find that that is actually an issue with the increasing use of social media, that any issues or any concerns do not get reported properly. So what would you do in terms of working with the police to make sure that they encourage that reporting is actually done properly, and not just properly, but it's actually easy for people to report so that they would actually do so? I know we've had conversations about 101 and people waiting on the phone for quite a long period of time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, May. You will know that this is one of my hobby horses, if you like. There's a number of factors to it. Let's have the first factor. Let's talk about ASB as it currently stands. The Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner commissioned a survey before I entered office, which looked at antisocial behaviour and how people saw it and how they reported it. And there was a marked overlap between where they thought they should report and where they actually needed to. So let me explain. If I take noise as an example, nearly 50% of people thought that noise was an issue for the police and would report it to the police. 50% of people thought that it was an issue for the local government authority and would report it to the local government authority, where it actually is. So that's one of the issues that we've got to address, May, and that's where I'll be working with the local government authorities to make certain that there is clear information out there about what you report to whom. But let's also talk about the issue around 101 and reports into the police. There are two factors here. One factor is consistency of message of where you should report. So let me take this opportunity just to run through. There is a website called Ask Ned. You should have a look there if it's not an emergency. And let me explain why. We've had people phoning the 999 calls and saying, this is an emergency, I'm locked out of my flat. That isn't a 999 emergency, that is you need a locksmith. And so you can find those directions on Ask Ned. Then, if it's something you wish to report to the police, then you have the 101 system. Now, the 101 system was originally intended to actually overarch and connect both the police and the local authority. But when it came in, it had been adjusted to be just the police. So from a 101 perspective, what you need to do is either go online to the police or email 101 or phone 101. Now, if it's just reporting something you've seen, something you want the police to be aware of, but you don't want them to do anything, then I would suggest you email 101. All those emails are looked and they are built into the pattern of intelligence that the police have. And then we come to 999, which is for emergencies or crimes in action. So that message needs to be consistent and needs to go out. That's one thing. The second thing is we need to transform 101. And one of the areas which will bring that in is when we move to single online home, which is a web portal which helps cut demand. Now, it isn't within my gift, but unfortunately, Dorset is one of the last areas in the country to move to single online home. So now I'm here, that's one of the things I will be pushing on. And we believe that we'll be doing that in the next couple of years. So we're moving forward to transform the efficiency of what we've got, but we've got to get more consistent in what we say, and we've got to have a joined up information approach with our partners. And that's what I'll be working on going forward. I hope that helps.
Thank you very much, Dave. Full answer. And obviously there's the national move on 101 as well, with a new contract being let. But this panel has done to death 101, so I don't really wish to pursue that any further. Les.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Commissioner.
Morning, Les.
How are you doing?
I'm good.
Good. During your election campaign, one of the things you mentioned is about making cops crime fighters again. Now, comments on Facebook came up about, you were asked about that by some people, and you said, elect me and I'll show you how I'm going to do that. I'm interested to do that. As a former cop, my view is that the subjective view is that you just get rid of the bureaucracy and you let cops go out there. And catch crooks and lock them up and deal with them that way. What is your view? How are you going to achieve that? And how is it going to be scored, if you like?
Thank you, Les. I'm really grateful that you asked that question. I think it's kind of important. I haven't really told the story of where this came from. So let me tell you where this came from. One of the things I did when I was a candidate was I actually went through all the police and crime plans for other forces and looked at them in the context of effectiveness. And one of the areas that I was concerned about was antisocial behaviour, obviously. But I found that there was a couple of outliers, Dorset being one of them. And what it didn't say in the Dorset Police and Crime Plan before now, it didn't have an aspiration to cut crime and antisocial behaviour. So that was one thing. So that was kind of one of the areas that I was going to look at. But then what happened was I started doing what I think every candidate should do, which is go out with the police, not just visit with the Chief Constable, but also go out with the different parts of Dorset Police to understand the force that you would be holding to account. And on one of the busiest nights of the year, I saw a couple of things which also played into the issue about whether the police are crime fighters or not. One was we spent 20 minutes going to a job, 10 minutes it being a non-event, 20 minutes to come back, and 15 minutes for each officer to write it up on a computer, which talks to the bureaucracy that you're talking about. So that's part of it. COVID also became a part of it because we were asking officers to police parties and do things which we never asked them to do before. But the most interesting comment I got, again that night, which is where the phrase came from, was when an officer leant on his arm, looked at me, and I said, "What do you want from a PCC? We've got money coming, we've got officers coming. What else is there that you want from a PCC?" And he leant on his arm and he said, "Make us crime fighters again." So that came from somebody within the force. It fitted with what I was seeing from the need to have a police and crime plan, which actually said what it said on the tin. And it also addressed the issues around bureaucracy and the COVID issue, which came later. So that's where that came from.
Commissioner, as a manager of people, many cops want to be crime fighters. That's what they join for. But it's how are you going to do that?
Well, how we're going to do that is we are going to have a police and crime plan which allows them to be crime fighters because it says that that's what we want them to do. That's why the first thing that it says in the police and crime plan is to cut crime and antisocial behaviour. And you'll see that it also talks about fighting rural crime. It also talks about fighting violent crime. It talks about them being visible in our communities. All those are directly related to them being crime fighters.
But they were doing
also,
that anyway.
You're right. Also, you're right about the bureaucracy. And that's something the Chief and I have spoken about how we can cut that, how we can help them to be out there and more visible. So those are the two things which I think obviously will make a difference. How we'll measure it, well, we've got a deep dive in November about all sorts of things, including the KPIs and how we're going to put those into place. But the ultimate measure, the real measure of anything that I do and anything that the police do is how the public feel. Do they feel safer? Is crime going in the right direction? So I think I'll probably answer that probably more extensively than was probably required, but it's one of the things I do feel passionately about.
Thanks, Dave. Les, food for thought for the future, and I'm sure it's an area that you will wish to raise at future meetings, shall we say. I can see there are hands up, but what I'd like to do is move through the crib sheet that we've got in front of us, and you'll get a chance to answer your question when I actually get to you. So, Tony.
Unfortunately, I don't have the crib sheet.
No worries, Tony. Mark Howell.
Yes, thank you. Hello, David. My question relates to antisocial behaviour and it's linked to drug use, in particular sale of drugs in streets, etc. Anecdotal evidence suggests certainly in Poole that this is increasing, and it's also interesting in the context of Radio 4 Today on the Today programme, talking about how cracking down, on people who are selling drugs is only half the issue, and really. You need to be providing, the council's health services need to be providing appropriate opportunities treatment for people to get off drugs. I'm just wondering where this fits in, because it seems to me a crucial link in terms of dealing with antisocial behaviour.
Thanks, Mark.
You're absolutely right, Mark, and thank you for raising that. I've been quite vocal about the need to address the issue of drugs in our society. If I can explain where I am with it, I mean, to me, there are 4 things that need to happen. First is around the tough enforcement. And again, that's something which is being discussed by myself and my new Chief Constable about how we go about making certain that that occurs and occurs in the way that has an effect. You'll be aware that there is a lot of partnership working that is required in order to make certain we have that tough enforcement. So, for example, I was able to observe Operation Enhance, which was a joint operation with the British Transport Police in the summer. And that was an operation that took £60,000 worth of drugs off the streets, and I understand led to 20 people being interrogated and arrests coming from it. But it needs to go further than that. The 5 PCCs for the Southwest, we have a meeting in October where we are looking to get final agreement for our priorities, one of which is to basically drive serious organised crime appertaining to drugs, attempt to drive it out of the Southwest, because these criminals don't see borders. So we're going to address that. But let me move on to the other parts of the issue. One is, what do we need for the people who are addicted? We need effective rehabilitation. So I've asked my team to basically look at that. I've also taken a national portfolio, which is now renamed Addictions and Substance Misuse. And it draws together drugs, alcohol, and chaotic gambling. And as part of that portfolio, one of our first objectives is to map effective rehabilitation across the UK. I've asked my own team to look at what we've got going on in Dorset, because you're absolutely right. We need to attack this from a number of areas. We need to reduce the demand, which also means that we need impactful education for our young people. You know, ex-chair governors, when I was in that post, we had an issue, and we asked the kids why this issue occurred when they've had the educational training, and they basically said it wasn't fit for purpose. So it needs to be looked at and reviewed, which is where we are. We've reviewed it internally for the force, but we also need to review it nationally. We need to go younger. We have kids of 8 and 9 who act out drug behaviours in the playground. So we need a joined up approach, and that's again through that national portfolio I'll be trying to get. And the last thing I think is also we need to say no. That's what helped in New York. In New York, you basically had the community saying, no, we've had enough of this. So we need to be able to increase community resilience in order to address this problem in our communities. So that was a snapshot of my thinking around it. But you're absolutely right. It needs tough enforcement at the top, but it needs much more than that. It needs effective rehabilitation, keeping what works, getting rid of what doesn't work, and making certain that we cut demand by explaining to our kids the risks.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, David. There's also a very interesting article in Police Insight this month as well, which you may wish to have a look at if you have not had a chance yet. Pete Barrett.
Chair, I haven't got nothing to add.
Okay, thank you, Pete. Dave Taylor.
Sorry, nothing to add. I couldn't try to get my mic on. Thanks for that. Good report. Thank you, David.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good morning, Commissioner, and Thank you for that verbal update. I want to bring it back to the ASB because that's where your survey indicates that most people are concerned. I'm new to my role as being a pillar lead for Victim and Community First. You mentioned a case of an individual calling 999 because they were locked out outside of their house, and you talked about 101 and doing things online and how to get the best out of our police force, etc. But you also mentioned the AskNed system. The AskNed system is an ideal way to get the information at a glance if you are online, as regards where you should channel your call. Should it be go to the local authority? Should it perhaps go to, a rehabilitation centre, or should it actually go to the police? Now, the 101 system, as most of us knows, is that it's got a responsibility for the safeguarding of people to make sure that there's not a threat or risk or harm to the individual that's calling. Coming back to the AskNed system, what are your thoughts on actually promoting that to individuals, perhaps of the older generation, etc., that the telephone is their most pretty much their only point of call, for individuals that perhaps are of an older generation that are stuck in their homes, see things happening outside their window that's causing them concern, to actually use the AskNed system to actually get this information to the police if they require it, or to the local authority, or whoever is the right person. So my question is, how are you going to promote, as the Commissioner, the AskNed system to help those in the community that don't have access online to AskNed?
That's a very, very good question, George. And it also links into something else that I have plans in my police and crime plan to address, which is also for the population that you talk about, the elderly, which is around the issue of fraud and scamming. So obviously we'll use all the channels that we have. We'll use the media channels, etc., etc. We will keep on having campaigns in order to drive awareness around the whole contact system in order to get it right. And I'll be working with the local authorities in order to do that. But let's just park that for a moment, because there's two other things I'd like to talk about. One is linking that to the fraud issue around scamming, because again, it can be promoted as part of the same thing. I had as a candidate an agreement in principle from a couple of providers to put another 200 volunteers across Dorset out there to talk to specifically the elderly around fraud and scamming. I also got a tacit agreement from a commercial provider to pay for the printing. So we will be taking those things forward. And I can see it can be completely reasonable that as part of that information, we would include the contact reporting system, including AskNed. But the other thing I'll also say is that there is some other initiatives which are also happening out there, which also we should promote. For example, My Safer Bournemouth, which is a website specifically, although it specifically says Bournemouth, it has a lot of this good information on it, and there will be other sites like that elsewhere. So I think we have a commitment to make certain the information on there, it first of all fits with the correct information, but once it is, and My Safer Bournemouth is, then we also promote those as well. So people know where to go and they can see where they've got to report.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for your answer there. I would caution against getting lost a little bit in the weeds as regards My Safer Bournemouth. I'm a member of the site myself, and again, but we're back online. I really appreciate the opportunity for these 200 volunteers to actually have the funding to leaflet those individuals that the telephone is their main port of call as regards reporting issues that they have. So I look forward to seeing more of that, Chair, as it comes through.
Thanks very much, George. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two little questions. In relation to benchmarking, what date are you going to compare it to? Because obviously if you compare it to 2020, it's going to be a little bit farcical in certain areas. So I'm assuming is your benchmarking going to be against 2019?
Correct.
And in terms of making cops crime fighters, I understand the point about bureaucracy, and I think that most probably is easier of the two things to crack. But the second thing is what is it that you see the police currently do that you'll encourage the Chief Constable to stop them doing?
It's a very good question, Ian. What I've asked the Chief Constable to do is actually answer that question for me. So he's working through that at the moment. So I'm very happy to come back once we've had that discussion.
Okay, if that's the case, then can we put that down as a return or an update to the these minutes, if that's easier, whichever way it is. I suspect it can take longer than the publication of these minutes for him to work that out. But can we?
Yeah, it's going to be a work in progress for a while.
Yeah.
Do you want that down?
I do, yeah, because I think the easy thing to say is we'll cut bureaucracy, but the actual crux of it is what are they not going to do that they do now to then go into doing the crime fighting? That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Sherry.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Commissioner. I'd like to ask you some questions about violence against women and girls. Now, the report that you'll be familiar with, which was commissioned by the Home Office and published on the 17th of September, spoke about an epidemic of violence against female victims. It identified, among other things, inconsistencies in the use of Clare's Law, that's the Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme, across forces. It also identified a failure to work closely with other agencies and commented on the resourcing of this issue, and interestingly enough, made a contrast between the resourcing of this issue with that of county lines, which I know is a priority for us, but that was very much commented on the difference between that resources. So now, in the light of the recommendations, Commissioner, of this report, could I ask, firstly, do you plan to review the priorities given to violence against women and girls in the light of what this was said in this report? Do you know, and can you find out whether the implementation of Clare's Law in Dorset is in line with best practice? And will you be meeting with other police and crime commissioners from forces that were named as having a good track record in dealing with this area of work to see what we might learn from that? Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. All good questions. I will address the Clare's Law one first.
Thank you.
Then I'll go into my view of violence against women and girls and how I'm addressing it with my plan. And then I'll talk about a little bit about liaison with other PCCs, if I may.
Thank you.
So first of all, about the Clare's Law, or as it's called, the Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme. So in short, the Dorset police process is working effectively. It's within the 35-day window for domestic violence disclosures. So it's basically addressed as business as usual within the force performance mechanisms. The force lead chairs hold a weekly meeting where they look at the number of outstanding cases, they discuss them, and they triage as needed according to basically threat. Applications can be progressed out of hours if there's a need for urgent action. I think we've got to be a bit careful because there's a distinction. There's a distinction between the right to know, where DP or another agent should become aware of the history of a person that we believe their new partner should know, and right to ask, where we receive a request direct from a member of the public. National guidance states right to know should be dealt with in 35 days, which DP is well inside of. Mm-hmm. The right to ask requests to turn around much quicker. Mm-hmm. So if you are worried and you need the answer, you'll get it quick. From a strategic perspective, I note that the number of requests the force is receiving is increasing, and that this is reflected nationally. If this continues as expected, then I think they're going to need to actually have a dedicated team to manage this process. And obviously I'll talk to them about that and how they're going to resource that at the appropriate time. Okay. So that's Clare's Law. Now, members of the panel and a chair will know that I have a low tolerance for any form of sexual harassment, and with the reopening of the nighttime economy, I don't see an excuse for women and girls to get unwanted attention. You will have seen that violence against women and girls is included in my plan, and I'm also very pleased that the Chief Constable and his team are significantly pushing that with me. I should note that, for example, one of the things that I saw happening in another area was something called Operation Vigilant, which I first identified in Thames Valley as a candidate, and I drew to the attention of the force once I came into office. That has now been picked up. So your question about liaison with other PCCs, that happens extremely regularly. We have a WhatsApp group. If somebody has a brilliant idea and it's working really well in their area, they will tell the others routinely. It's a sad fact that some of my closest PCC colleagues, such as Alison Hernandez in Devon and Cornwall and Katie Bourne in Sussex, have basically been subjected to stalking, harassment and worse, and are powerful advocates in this space. Because we've basically got to address it. You will also probably be aware, if you follow my election campaign, that I have been talking to victims of stalking, particularly those who have had a problem with stranger stalking, which, although is a minority, is obviously significantly scary to them. And I'm very keen that we address this going forward. And actually, when we talk about the 100-day plan, there's a little piece in there which I can actually talk to you about. So we're all over it, is the answer. It is a high priority for both myself and Dorset Police, and I've checked that that mechanism is in place, and Clare's Law is working well here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dave. Bobby.
Thank you. Can I just thank Sherry for her excellent question? It was brilliant. Thank you. Moving on from Sherry and protected characteristics, your police and crime survey released in July, did that inform this police and crime plan?
The police and crime survey released in July was one element which informed the police and crime plan.
Okay, so I saw a tweet and I went on it and the tweet was correct. At the end, you've asked about sex, age and ethnicity. And I wondered why that was, please.
I will ask Simon to comment on that, if I may.
Happy to, Commissioner. So, Vice Chair, the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, like all public sector bodies, has a requirement to ensure that we impact assess policies and processes. So in relation to the public sector equality duty, there's a requirement placed on us to understand and ensure that we are taking views from all segments of society. So that's the requirement for those demographic details.
Okay, thank you. Can I just have a follow-up then, please? In that case, how are you showing under the public sector equality duty your due regard, Chief Executive, to disabled and gay people who have not been surveyed? Because if we're going to do a year-on-year comparison, I really hope that we do, we need to take, therefore, the views and the understanding of how protected characteristics are viewing crimes and what impacts them the most. So the Chief Executive is absolutely correct. We should be looking at sex, and we should be looking at age, and we should be looking at ethnicity. But I'm not sure why we hadn't included disabled and gay people at the end of that, please. Could that be addressed in future? Would that be all right?
I'll take that, absolutely.
That'd be lovely. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Bobby. Final question for me. It's been quite a lot in the local media about business crime. What action are you intending to take over business crime that's being reported in, as I said, the local media?
Thank you. Again, that is one of the things which I very quickly found was an area of concern to, well, to a lot of our communities across Dorset. So you'll be aware that the police and crime plan has been shared with colleagues, including Dorset Police. So we've been liaising closely with their business crime leads, Chief Inspector Andy Edwards and Inspector Alan Deacon. So they've agreed an initial response to the areas highlighted in my plan. When I came into office, I was very keen that we got on top of this. So I've embarked on a tour of businesses, retail premises and bids to understand their issues and concerns, including chambers like Dorset Chamber. Likewise, the NPTs are also, as part of their long-term view on increasing engagement, are also looking at understanding crime and community safety issues, particularly affecting business. And we're going to map these crimes and develop at solving strategies. But also, we want to be as good as we can about how best to prevent this crime. For example, the business crime leads are working with the Dorset Chamber of Commerce to review and explore ways of producing an electronic newsletter, offering advice, support, and highlighting engagement and training opportunities with the force. One of the things that I'm very aware of is the issue around reporting and the issue around shoplifting and the theft packs. So we need to basically address this. We need to streamline that process. And we're exploring ways with business to increase the reporting of crimes using new technology in order to address that. This to me now, like the national movement, is becoming an area of business as usual, as far as I'm concerned. We now have a national portfolio lead for business crime, which is a recent innovation in the last year or so. We need to now translate this philosophy down to our level. My office is also in the process of exploring setting up a safer Dorset business partnership, bringing representatives of business together to work on business crime issues with the police in order to try and basically have a better effect in this area. And there's a number of national initiatives that I'm watching closely in order to see if they are successful, how we can bring them to Dorset.
I think that the issue, and I'm basing this purely on what I've seen in the media, was a lack of response.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was actually balanced because of the Thrive model. So how do you intend to overcome, from the PCC's perspective, what is in actual fact National Police Chief Council policy?
Well, it may be National Police Chief policy, but there's also a move that business crime is an important part of business as usual. So it will be with the chief to balance the operational constraints in order to deliver that. But let me give you just a thought, Mike, around this, right? Because the threat, risk and harm thing, yeah, absolutely. But let's just say the kid who's just nicked the Mars bars or the addict who's just nicked something out of the shop. They will be affecting, that kid will grow up if he's not addressed. He'll grow up and maybe do more things under the ASB banner. But I know of instances where there are 12-year-old kids who start off with a bit of ASB, and by the time they're 14 years old, they're running a county line with 9 of their mates. So, you know, you can argue that threat, risk and harm needs to be repurposed in order to look at that.
Yeah, so it's a case of getting attendance. Rebalancing the prioritisation is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Dave, as always. Moving on to item 6, priority lead policy. Mark, can you just talk us through this one, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the panel's endorsed establishing a priority lead role, and that will be linked to the Police and Crime Commissioner's Police and Crime Plan. A priority lead policy has been developed and is presented here to the panel for approval. So, Chair, if the panel is minded to approve that policy, that approval can be delegated to officers. So perhaps you could just request a panel member to propose and second that approval.
Could I possibly request what Mark has just outlined? Could I ask somebody, please?
I'll propose it, Mike.
Okay, thanks, Ian.
Chair, I'm happy to second. Councillor Haynes.
Brilliant. Thanks, May.
Thanks,
Right.
Chair. So we can take that delegated authority. Yeah.
Is that good enough for government work? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then moving swiftly on to item 7, which is the sort of the meat of our meeting from a sort of statutory perspective, going through the quarterly monitoring report from the PCC. Mindful that this is scrutiny of the previous plan or the current plan from the previous Police and Crime Commissioner. So we are in a bit of a sort of phony war area at the moment as far as the new plan is concerned. Thank you very much, PCC, for producing the new format. So the panel members have got a chance to look at the reporting format. So not only have we got your new report format, but we've also got the old one. So we've got a very full picture on what you're proposing and also where you are, where your office is with the old, I use the term loosely, the current plan or your predecessor's plan. So I've waffled on long enough. Dave, can I hand over to you, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, you'll recognise that the monitoring report has a different look this time round. It made sense for me to represent the work of the office, in particular the first 100 days, alongside the priorities set out in the Police and Crime Plan. This will make it easier going forward to discuss it with the appointed priority leads. So there's 3 points I want to highlight. First of all, this is still very much a work in progress. This product will evolve over the next few months, especially the benchmarking sections. Let me give you a couple of moving parts there. One is obviously I've got a new chief constable, and we need to discuss those benchmarking sections with them, which that process has started. But there's also quite a lot of national work being done. You'll have heard about 101 and national targets, etc., etc. We're not certain what that looks like and how it's going to land yet. So obviously we've got some elements which we will have to benchmark anyway. So I'm looking forward to discussing all this with you at the next panel training session, so that I've also got your thoughts captured. So the benchmarking sections are very much a work in progress. So the final overview also of the 2017-21 plan is included for reference. This slide relates to the work of my predecessor, so I'll ask my team to field any questions that might relate to this. I don't think it's appropriate that I discuss what happened before I got here. And third, right, please bear in mind that this pack only relates to Q1 April to June of 2021, and so compares with the same period in 2020, which was the period immediately following the first national lockdown. So that explains some of the larger increase and decreases in the statistics provided. Put simply, it's all over the shop because the data's all over the shop. It's quite variable. Hopefully that made it very easy to navigate the document, and that members are appreciative of the greater level of information that's been provided. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through the report, and I'll take all the questions at the end, if I may. The quarterly monitoring report basically is, I see, the key way that we keep track on what we're up to, and that we can demonstrate to the panel and indeed the wider public that we're doing our job. So if you look at it, you'll see that we've taken the 6 priorities from the Police and Crime Plan, and very clearly we've broken them out into individual spaces. Now, what I could do is I could talk about them all in one go on the first page, but what I think I'll do is I'll talk about the individual priorities and what happened in that first, I guess, between May the 6th and the end of June. So the first one was cut crime and anti-social behaviour. So you'll see there that basically we broke out a number of things under this priority. And one of the first things I wanted to make certain was that we had a good summer. After the summer we had last year, where we had running fights on the beach, a major incident declared, I wanted to make absolutely certain that we got a grip on ASB and crime, so that the summer with a potential lockdown being released didn't go the same way. So I asked the force to respond around antisocial behaviour in particular, and they launched an operation which now gives them a priority focus, which was Operation Relentless. What I did personally was, knowing the hotspot areas from my work as a candidate, I went to all of them very quickly in that first period. So to the centre of Bournemouth, to Weymouth Esplanade and the harbour, to Ashley Road in Poole, to the bus station. I wanted to make certain that those areas, with community leaders and the neighbourhood policing team, to make certain that we had crime and ASB understood and we had initiatives in place to address it. Something which also came up during that first period was the issue around catalytic converter thefts, which I wanted to make certain that we had a handle on. And again, the police responded to that, and we very quickly addressed the critical manufacturers and indeed distributed smart water to those who had vehicles likely to be affected the most. Overall, we were able to see a 9.3% drop in recorded crime for that first period. But it's also about basically setting up other things. I alluded to it earlier, a fraud and cyber crime. I've begun conversations with partner agencies about a joint crime prevention campaign, which I referred to earlier. Somebody described it as one of my hobby horses earlier, outside the meeting, around e-scooters. It's only my hobby horse because it's what the people at Dorset have written to me about. So I basically sought the reassurance of the force regarding e-scooter reinforcement, and I spoke to that at the start of this meeting. The other thing I did on road safety was I also urged motorists to take care on the roads, and we had a bit of a drink drive campaign, particularly with the cessation of lockdown. Regarding burglary, we've got some ideas about that, and I was briefed on the Dorset Bobby van scheme, which I'd like to expand. We also continued lobbying for around the issue of pet theft. To the end of June, we were still lobbying about pet theft, let's put it that way. I agreed very quickly in office that we would support young people, and we've extended the cadet scheme, and there'll be more about that in the next quarterly report. So the second priority was about making policing more visible and connected in our communities. So basically here, regarding what we've done, I wanted reassurance from the chief officers, very specifically, that we would maximise community policing and frontline deployment. Now, I've had those briefings. I've got an agreement in principle, and there'll be more detail about that coming out in the future. I received briefs on the neighbourhood engagement commitments. I think we can go further regarding our engagement, and I've had conversations with the force regarding this. We've also had initial conversations regarding the police estate, because that also is about connectivity with the public. And obviously, I have a significant view that because this job is elected by the people, I should be engaged with the people. So I've done a significant amount of engagement with not only Dorset Police and our partners, but also Dorset community since I came into office. Regarding customer service, and I use that term absolutely correctly, I know that we have an issue around things like reporting, things like police complaints, coming back to people after they've made a contact. And those are all things that both the chief and I are discussing about how to improve going forward. I spoke about a single online home, for example, in that context. Now, priority 3 is the one about fighting violent crime and high harm. This is one of the ones where we need both a short-term strategy and a long-term strategy. So, for example, around addiction, I spoke earlier in answer to one of the questions around some of the things we're doing around getting tough. I also spoke about the fact that I'm joint lead on the addiction and substance misuse portfolio, which is about addressing effective rehabilitation, about looking at raising awareness about the harm of, for example, recreational drugs going forward. And I also spoke about the need to have a regional approach in order to address drugs in our society. We talked a bit earlier again about violence reduction in the context of violence against women and girls. And I was very keen that we had that bottomed out. So that's why the force brought forward the Operation Vigilant concept, which I discussed earlier. I also went to see the Sexual Trauma and Recovery Service to hear about their work. I'm very keen that we get this right, and that's why we will look at whatever bids we can together with local authority in order to basically address things like safer lighting, things like CCTV, those things that we can make the environment safer as people move around. But there's other elements within that. There is elements around domestic abuse and indeed stalking. So during that first period, I committed to an independent stalking advocacy caseworker service to make certain that continues. I also went to see UTrust to understand their work, which I knew them quite well actually. But there's other elements that we're also doing since then. The Dorset Police has introduced a number of improvements on how they respond to, and this follows a rise in reports nationally around domestic abuse. So very much a start there, and there'll be more in the next quarterly report. Number 4 is to fight rural crime. I'm very keen that as the people spoke to me in the rural areas, and I know that rural crime in 2019, there was a 28.7% increase in farm theft, for example. I know this is one of the areas of concern that we need to make certain that we get it sorted. I'm very pleased that I've got an initial commitment to double the rural crime team. We only had 3 in the rural crime team. As I say, I want to double that, but the the Chief Constable and I have a shared ambition that this goes far further than that. But once again, we've agreed that we've got a shared ambition. We've got to deliver on it. I said during the election campaign that I wanted to introduce a new scheme, Country Watch, which brings everybody together in rural communities in order to try and address criminality in ASB and indeed road safety in those areas. So as part of my first 100 days, I asked my team to convey a roundtable meeting. The reason that RAG rating is red is because it fell into October slightly, but we will get there. Fly tipping. Obviously, I know that's a concern. I have liaised with the local authorities on it, and I'm aware of the scrap fly tipping campaign. I'd like to understand what our parameters are and how far we can go with that. And I've talked to PCC colleagues around the country. So again, there will be more news about that going forward. I've also received briefings around wildlife crime. I've been out with the rural crime team. I've met one of the Doughty volunteers who basically sits in our countryside and watches for hare coursers. And I've also dealt with a number of correspondence on issues around wildlife crime in Dorset. To me, basically, the way of addressing these things is to increase the rural crime team, and also from the perspective of linking up, also increasing the neighbourhood policing team in our rural areas. Both of those, as I say, we have a commitment, we just have to deliver now as the uplift comes through. So putting communities and victims first. That's the Q1 report. So basically, I reviewed the existing support services and contracts for victims once I got in. I wanted to know what gaps may exist and where future commissioning opportunities lie. And we're working on that as we speak. We've also changed the way that we're doing these scrutiny panels going forward. So why is that? That is because I wanted a overarching panel that delivered on issues that cut across a number of areas, alongside the out-of-court disposal panel. I also want to increase the awareness of support available to all types of hate crime, and I plan to issue communications in support of the national days and weeks of action going forward. Business and retail crime, I gave quite a long, detailed answer to the question. But basically, we're moving forward, liaising with the bids. We've got them coming together where I want to launch a Safer Dorset business community. And we've also set up a new service for children and vulnerable adults, which receive the best possible support when interviewed by police. This is the appropriate adult service. And the reason I'm really keen on this is because this was one of the areas which was highlighted to me during the election campaign by officers, and the difficulty getting an appropriate adult, which delayed things mightily. The very bureaucracy which Les was talking about earlier. And obviously this vulnerability, through my national portfolio work, I want to make certain that we identify the best methods to support those people who are struggling with addiction. And that to me is key around what I said earlier. We need effective rehabilitation. Now, what I'll do with the last priority, the make every penny count priority, is I'm going to talk through the themes. And then I'm going to hand over to Julie, my Chief Financial Officer, to talk through the numbers with you. So from the point of view of funding, first of all, I wanted to make certain that we had clear governance and audit arrangements. So what I and now the new Chief Constable have done is made certain that we have those necessarily meetings and boards in place and they fit. You'll be aware as a panel, of course, that James Vaughan announced his intention to retire in the autumn. So at the time of this report, we very quickly moved to a recruitment process, and we have interviews scheduled, as it says, for July. But obviously, you know what happened after that, and we've got a new Chief Constable. I've also made certain that I understand the HMIC reports, and particularly the service value for money profiles. I actually asked my Chief Financial Officer to do a review how we compare with other similar forces. So that was an interesting exercise. We continue to support the Force Innovation Board, and you'll hear a report about that from my Chief Executive as part of this meeting. But really, one of the things I wanted to embed is if every penny truly is going to count for Dorset, then we have to work as Dorset to address those issues that face us. So what I did was I initiated very quickly meetings with the leaders and chief executives for both top-tier local authorities in Dorset, as well as meetings with the chairs of the two community safety partnerships. We need a joined up approach. I've made it my business across the first part of my term to meet with as many of those people who can affect change as possible. And some of those I knew from the election period as well. We can only win and deliver if we work together as partners. I'm going to hand it over to Julie now, and then I'll take the ball back after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. So the financial reports for Q1 are contained in your agenda packs from pages 23 to 26. So the report shows the revenue budget performance up to the end of July, actually, so an extra month just to make sure that we had the most up-to-date position for you, and the capital to the end of June, because we do monitor that on a quarterly basis. So overall, the revenue budget is forecasting small overspend, equivalent to 0.22% of the net revenue of the overall total budget. And at this stage of the year, that's not a concern. That there's a significant amount of time period left for the force to bring that back on track. And I know there are still a number of uncertainties and things that are still being worked through, particularly mutual aid relating to the G7 summit down in Cornwall that happened in June. So that's being worked on. We'll finalise the position, but there's no real concerning reasons for any of those overspends at this point in time. It's still being very actively managed by the force, and we continue to report back. In terms of the capital programme, that's also reviewed quarterly by the Capital Strategy Group, and we really do look at exactly how projects are progressing, looking at identifying slippage, etc. That's showing an underspend of around 700,000 for the year, but a vast amount of that is being held in an unallocated budget where people have identified underspends in the budget for the year. That's being held centrally so that it can be made available for new capabilities that come forward that are supported by a robust business case. So again, we're trying to get better at forecasting on the capital programme, identifying slippage, and we'll continue to do that as we do through the year. Reserves are set out on the final page, and again, largely reflecting things like carry forwards that were agreed at the outturn. One thing to just identify is there is an additional capital receipt that has been generated at the beginning of this year. There won't be too many of those, so at the moment we are not planning on using that at the minute. We'll hold that, and because that really is the last of the family silver, so we will not be just spending it on kind of anything. It will be held and applied to the capital programme certainly in a very planned manner. But I'm happy to answer any financial questions when we get to that point, but I'll hand back to the Commissioner to answer questions on the rest of the monitoring report.
Commissioner.
Well, I think we're just about there from the point of view of presenting the report to the panel, Mike. Can I ask, just to make it easy, and as you've just seen the data, if there's any questions on that financial data which Julie's just presented, if we can take those questions first?
Yeah, I was just going to say, whilst Julie was on screen, first of all, I was delighted to see that what was being projected in February as part of the preset meeting now is fully reflected in the financial year for 21-22, which is a bonus. We'll leave it at that. But I was delighted to see that, and it shows good, robust financial management, both on your office day and also from a police perspective as well. One small question that I did note was that there was a new legal reserve. Whilst the amount is small, it's only 96k, it was new. and therefore 2 reasons. One, to let you know that we do go through this, and to highlight that that wasn't there back in February. It is there now. It is under earmark reserves, therefore it should have a use. 2 questions really. Why is it there? Why can it not come out of general reserves or general balances or whatever you call them?
So this was in response to the fact that in recent years there's been increasing requests for OPCC to fund legal representation of officers at inquests where their position is in conflict with that of the force, so they need to be separately represented. Officers are legally required to receive external representation, and in such cases, but due to financial challenges within the National Staff Association, the requests for that support have come through to OPCCs increasingly, and we've been required to step in.
Okay.
So as a result, an allowance was made in the budget for 2020-2021, as we were expecting to have to pay out. That was introduced for the first time, but because of the pandemic, some of the inquests where that was required were delayed, etc. So we didn't actually spend it last year, but we will still need to. So we've put that into a reserve, so it's specific for that purpose.
Thanks, Julie. Excellent. What we would normally do now is I would ask pillar leads from the current plan, the old plan, to lead and then move into the panel. What I'm going to do actually is I'm going to smash all that together now. So we're going to look at questions from the panel based on your new report, Dave, on your 100 days, and also the old element from the pillar leads if they've got any points that they wish to raise. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I should just qualify that's not the 100-day report; it's the first quarter report. So it just takes us up to June.
Yeah, we're in this.
We're in this
phony war area at the moment. Bobby, I can see you've got your hand up. Is there anything specific you want to raise?
Yeah, I thought we were taking questions on the financial report first.
Bobby's got a question on the financial.
Any questions you want to raise?
Yep, thank you. Yeah, this is around financial resilience and also reducing the dependency on council tax precept and government grants. Given that government borrowing is probably the lowest it's been for a very long time, are you looking at any investments using the capital to implement strategies to support the medium and long-term financial planning and financial security as we move ahead?
So in terms of our capital programme, we are looking to move to a more sustainable position and to invest in things that become more efficient. So certainly in terms of the PRISM programme, that is within the ICT, that's about investing in new technologies and making more efficiencies. But certainly in terms of the sustainability and the financial resilience of our capital programme, that is planned in over the next medium-term financial plan to ensure that we are funding our ongoing replacement programmes from an ongoing finance source, so within the revenue budget.
Thank you. And the resilience, are you generating anything that is income generating?
Not at the moment. There aren't any income generating programmes at the minute. That's a bit more difficult for policing than local authorities. So there isn't anything at the moment that has come up that is appropriate for policing to invest in at this point in time.
It is, however, something I'm keeping a close eye on. And if we had the same power that the LGA did around this particular issue, then obviously we would find it far easier in order to do that. We're hoping that that will be addressed in the near future.
That's brilliant. If we could do anything in that area, Mike, to support, it would be really good so that we can make them more sort of secure in their planning.
Absolutely.
They're working year to year at the moment. Thank you.
I think it's also worth highlighting that you do have I think it's 5-year capital plan in order to reduce the borrowing and all that sort of stuff as well. Before I start into the panel, Ian, do you have a finance question?
Yes, please. It might be, I might have misunderstood what Julie said about the representation at Coroner's Court. I thought individual officers paid fees monthly to their federation or association, and they accessed their support through that. Or have I misunderstood that?
Historically, that is what happened. Unfortunately, that hasn't been able to continue, and they've then come to OPCC for that support. The National Staff Association has had some issues.
That's very nice of them to have issues, but individual members have paid them a lot of money, so much money that the federation built their own hotel that with federated funds money. So I'm a bit confused as to why PCCs and forces would accept that from the federation, because that's what individuals pay their money for, and it is public money that's being used now where individuals had the facility through their staff associations.
I think the issue that we've got here, Ian, is this is a very much a legacy issue that I've inherited. I am not aware of the situation around other PCCs and whether it's something which is picked up on a national basis. It's an interesting comment. I'll look into it, sir. I quite like.
From the point of view of public money,
I agree.
If individuals are covered, then they should be covered. And if the association is saying they haven't got any money, then best they sell their hotel.
I didn't know they had a hotel. That's useful information.
There you go. Yeah. So I'll leave that with you then. So I will put that as an action again, Mike. That we'll have an update on that, please.
Yep. Elaine, can you make sure these actions are logged, please?
Yeah, I have done.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Ian. Inside information is always useful. Moving on to the panel, based on questions on what the PCC's just outlined and also the Old Star report. Dave Taylor, do you have any questions you'd like to raise?
One thing to congratulate Julie and Finance on the report. It's absolutely spot on, I must say. You know, it's nice to see that there is detail there and we can actually work with them and understand what's really going on. I did mention something earlier was regarding the staff health and wellbeing. I wonder if that's worth mentioning now, Mike. Can I ask your advice on that?
Yeah, if you wish to. Yep.
Yeah. The figures on health and wellbeing, page 31 of the report, states it's £1,500. Now, to me, that is a remarkably low figure considering what we've been through regarding the force and the public, as in with COVID and the situations that have arisen from it, as in mental health and wellbeing. I'm just wondering if that figure is really correct or should it be reviewed? That's my concern. Thanks,
Adam, it looks like you got the answer for that one.
Yeah, I think I can answer that. So that refers to one specific initiative that was funded under the Innovation Fund, which is on a later paper. So the totality of force expenditure against health and wellbeing will, of course, be far greater than that. And as members will know, in the previous term, a considerable amount more money was provided by this office. So apologies for any misunderstanding, but that's relating to one specific quote.
I know that's fantastic. Thank you very much for being direct on that and being precise. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Adam, as always. Sherry.
Thank you, Chairman. Question under the Victims and Communities theme, you flag up changes to the scrutiny panel arrangements. I understand this includes changes to the police use of force and stop and search panels. Stop and search, as we know, is a sensitive issue. So can I ask what scrutiny has been put in place to scrutinise the use of force and the use of stop and search by Dorset Police?
Thank you, Sherry. A really, really good question. This was something that I was very keen to make certain that we got a handle on when I entered office. So let's just deal with stop and search a little bit first. One of the things that we had was we had a challenge in place with the force around stop and search. I have kept that challenge in place. I am having ongoing conversations regarding that in order to address that specific issue, and we will get there. So basically what I'm saying is that diversity, equality and inclusion are at the crux of everything, both my office and also what Dorset Police do. And you know what? This is exactly what putting victims and community first is all about, irrespective of who is receiving the service. So then we come to the decision to review and reform the Stop and Search Scrutiny Panel. It's really, really important to understand that I basically have repeatedly challenged the force to explain their use of stop and search powers. The reason I reviewed the previous arrangements and decided to make changes was to put in place more robust challenge. What we had was we had a number of scrutiny panels which were operating and talking about the same issue in the same space. So I wanted to coalesce them into a new overarching scrutiny panel, which will scrutinise the use of police powers against set standards. So an element of benchmarking in there compared to other areas. My intention is to ensure that complex issues, particularly such as disproportionality, can be considered in one place. So guess what? The first job of that panel is to consider stop and search, use of force, how that translates into disproportionality, rather than in separate forums. So what was happening was that we weren't picking up wider trends. So I want to have that new panel in place with a more diverse membership, which gives better internal and external representation. And I'm hoping to have that up and running before the end of the year. It's about making it easier to get our arms around the problem and addressing it. And I wanted clearer and more precise scrutiny on it.
Yeah, it's very helpful. Thank you. Very encouraging response. Can I just request that at strategic level, at least, that we get news later down the line of how well that's all panned out, because it's important to this panel too. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Dave, can I just confirm for my own benefit more than anything, are you going to be using the sort of Devon and Cornwall model, which is the use of police powers community scrutiny panel?
No, I don't think so. I think we're creating our own thing. Simon, do you want to just talk to that specifically?
Happy to. So essentially what we have is that a number of different OPCCs have a number of different models. And it's really important, as the Commissioner says, that we understand what those local issues are and are live to that. So it's not necessarily the case whereby another process or another structure that works well in another force area, it might be efficient or might not to actually pick up and move across to Dorset. In Dorset, as has been articulated, we've got a really, really strong understanding of what our issues are over a number of areas. So what the Commissioner has decided to do here was to recognise those issues and to coalesce a panel, particularly to look at those issues that we've highlighted. So as we're saying, so it will look at legitimacy, we'll look at police powers, it will look at standards. We haven't got a name for it as yet, so we're currently working that through. We are looking at other models that exist elsewhere, but it will be very, very much focused on issues that are applicable to Dorset.
And will it cover police use of force?
Yeah, it will cover, essentially, there will be nothing that will be lost. So stop and search, use of force, will we be looking at those areas?
And taser?
Yeah, because that's part of use of force, Chair.
Yeah, okay, I get that. Right, thank you for that. Thank you, Sherry. Mark?
Yes, hello, thank you. I'd like to ask a question on what is a bit of a pet issue for me, which is 101 and general communication of particularly ASB and other related instances. It's really important that the public understand and are clear and have confidence in the ability to report, and the fact that the reports are going to be at least logged and used as evidence or information for the police's work. I recently came across a situation where a local group who had been reporting through 1&1 were told by a police officer that that information could not be collated and used by the police, and that information had to be sent through Crime Stoppers in order for that to be used. I struggle to believe that is true, It's very worrying if it is, because people have been directed to 101 for a long time. But I think it is an example of how the public is confused, and when they're confused, they're less likely to report incidences. And as a councillor, I really struggle, because I'm constantly saying to people, you have to report these instances to the police. And then when we come across instances where it seems that information is not being collated properly, or at least officers not informed how that is used, it is very difficult. So I'd like your comments on that, please.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. So for future reference, I'm very happy to entertain an email from you if that ever happens again. Just email me, give me the instance, and I will unpick it, because that's not right. That is wrong. 101, the way I expressed it earlier when I went through the reporting system, is the reporting system. The only time that I would suggest that you are going to use Crime Stoppers is if there is a reason that you have a concern around being named, because Crime Stoppers is not anonymous. So I can see that there could be instances that you wish to use Crime Stoppers for that reason. Otherwise, it is the way I said it. If you've got an emergency or a crime in action, it's 999. Everything else, it's 101, having checked that you need the police in the first place. And with 101, I would say, if it's something that's already happened and you want to inform the police about it, I would email 101 or go online and tell them. All those reports are logged. All those reports go to the neighbourhood policing team and are used as part of their intelligent profiles. And it could be absolutely vital, the information that you have. You might have the colour of a car where something dodgy is going on. Somebody else might have half a number plate for that car. Send that in, email it, report. What happened there sounds like it's been either misunderstood or there needs to be a bit of retraining done. But I'd like to know the instance, and I'll take it up with the Chief Constable.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Tony.
Yeah, I would actually like to ask another question on 101, because I noticed that the Home Office is seeking to procure a suitable organisation to run 101. That in itself disturbs me, because quite frankly, the beauty of 101 should be that it enables information to be shared locally and so on. Because one of the issues that I've had, and I would quite like to know about this, is similar to what was said just now. Actually, I actively encourage people to report stuff to 101, and I publish the details and so on, so people know that is where you should go for non-emergency stuff. But there was one case that cropped up recently, and I can't remember the details of it, but it was something that was reported on 101. I was copied into the email, so I know it was reported to 101. Sort of someone didn't just say it, but it never got passed to the neighbourhood police team. And if 101 is moved to another organisation, and I'm not sure whether it's actually run internally or whether it's run by an external organisation already, what measures will be taken to make sure that it links in and relates to the local police operations? Because someone in a national contractor.
That's a good question you've asked there, actually.
It worries me. So I'd quite like to know how we can actually avoid that happening and make sure that the information does get to where it's needed, and that local knowledge is part of it.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Dave.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. Really good question. Let me just address your local issue there. Again, as I said to Mark, if you email me if that happens, because my understanding is that 101 reports on 101s do go to the places they need to go to. And I want to know if it doesn't. So please let me know about any instance of that which happens directly, and I'll take it up. So let me address this issue around the idea of a suitable body to manage, operate, and administer the 101 single non-emergency number. The original idea, as I think I said earlier, was that 101 would not just be the police, it would be also the local authorities. So it would join up the issues that we've been discussing around ASB, et cetera, with the direction happening within 101. I'm afraid that this was news, right? This was news to both me and the Chief Constable. I do welcome it because of the idea that this could actually be a way of directing to the appropriate agency in the first place. Because a lot of our issues are around demand which comes in, which isn't correct from the point of view of going to the police. And so if it does work and it enables better public service delivery, then I'm all for it. But the point you make, Tony, is absolutely spot on. And I want to make certain that however this looks, and I and the other PCCs will be looking at it with a very, very close focus, because I want it to work for us locally in the same manner. So the devil will, of course, be in the detail. And so whilst I'm cautiously optimistic about it, I haven't seen that detail. So I'm going to reserve final judgment. But something I will reassure you about is that the local view, the local need, where it goes locally, will be exactly at the top of my agenda. And I will howl if it doesn't work like that, as will every other PCC in the country, I can assure you.
Thanks, Dave. You've answered Tony's question. And as I said earlier on, we have done 101 a lot on this panel. I'm going to leave it on there on 101. Ian.
Okay, I've got a couple. The first one is in relation to page 17 in the pack, which is the making police more visible and connected. It's got on the bit of number of full-time equivalent officers 2 green arrows. Could we not in the future have what the actual numbers are, because it's for the public, this. So seeing 2 green arrows don't really mean a lot, really. Would be a request there. But also, I think it would be handy as well as a note that, and perhaps again, this will help the public understand that just because you've got X number of officers doesn't necessarily mean they're all available. So the ones that are in training and not yet fit for independent patrol, if that's the right word, would be in your full-time equivalent, but wouldn't actually be deployable as a frontline resource. So I think that would help as well. So that would be a request, I suppose, really. And then the second one is in relation to page 19, which is staying with the sort of people theme, is you've got absence rates, but at the moment it says to be confirmed. Is that because the police can't provide it yet, or there's a delay in reporting?
Adam.
Thank you. It's not because the police can't provide it. It's as the Commissioner outlined at the very beginning, it's a work in progress, this report. So, okay. I mean, in all honesty, I put together those measures so that the panel could see the intended direction, but it wasn't reasonable for me at that time to ask the force to give me the response in the 10 minutes beforehand. So it's absolutely the intention you get that information, and at the training day we'll talk through those measurements and other requirements as well. But I'll hold my hand up to that. It's to be confirmed because I hadn't confirmed it with the force at the time of the paper deadline.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for that, Adam. I mean, I think it's just important, obviously, because it goes as part of our public pack, that if we know it's coming in the future, then that covers it now, which I think is important. So thank you for that. Okay, and then moving on to the next one, page 21 of the pack, you refer to increasing special constable hours there. Now, I vaguely remember in the history of PCCs before you, there was a bid to try and increase special constable numbers and hours. And it was started off with a fanfare of publicity and then slowly died because the recruiting didn't quite go according to plan. How do you see, from your point of view, that you can support and drive getting special constable hours up and also numbers up?
Thank you, Ian. So there's a number of things that I'm talking to the force about with that. The commitment I've had is a 25% increase in specials from them. They believe that they can recruit that. Your skepticism is obviously welcome. I'm going to be supporting them as far as I can with what they need to do that. There are some other initiatives I've seen from other PCCs around the country, which I don't want to talk about now because they are with other partners, but I want to be exploring and having those conversations in order to help drive recruitment.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm sceptical about it. It's just that obviously it was going to be something that was going to be fantastic before, and there was loads of promises made, but unfortunately things didn't quite pan out. So that hence the question, really.
Well, if you like, there'll be a laser-like focus on keeping on it from me, if that makes sense. It won't be allowed to drift. How's that?
That sounds better. Right, okay. That's it, Mike. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. May?
Thank you, Chair. I've got a fewer comments and some clarification as well. So with the cut crime and antisocial behaviour, absolutely welcome that pet theft actually features there, because being a pet owner, I completely get how distressing it can be if your pet gets stolen. So really, really welcome that. But the one thing I wanted to query in terms of the crime is that it was interesting to note that business crime was actually put under a different category, under the victims come first. So it's a case of, I know, Commissioner, you talked about that in future reports, we will be looking at the measures of success and what your KPIs are, et cetera. But it's just myself trying to, I guess, reconcile, well, a business crime is a crime, so should it not actually be included as part of crime and ASB, particularly if it's petty crime such as shoplifting, etc., which in and of itself may not be devastating to the people that it impacts, but nonetheless it is still a crime and it does irritate people that are affected. And then the other question I have relates to, I guess, which priority is it? The fight violent crime and high harm. Just to again clarify that the addiction also includes alcohol, because alcohol is actually becoming an increasing issue, and then can then lead to antisocial behavior, etc., etc. And then I will then just finish off very, very interested to hear about the fly tipping, the scrap fly tipping pilot, because for us here in BCP, we've actually launched a fly tipping pilot tackle enforcement, which is so far been going well. So I actually look forward to hearing more about the scrap fly tipping campaign and see whether we can share learnings from there, because as I say, we've also started a pilot to tackle fly tipping. That's it, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Meg. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Do you want me to answer the questions?
I don't. Were there any questions?
It was to do with why business crime was actually not included as part of crime.
Sorry, my fault.
Yeah, and the other piece was about alcohol. You asked me about, was alcohol included? Yes, absolutely. Alcohol is included, both there and in our addictions and substance misuse portfolio, because I'm well aware of the damage that alcohol does in our society if it's used to excess. And I'm also very clear that we may have issues amongst our young people regarding, too much alcohol, for want of a better way of putting it. So yes, absolutely included. One of the biggest issues we had is that this is a police and crime plan. So some of the things that we had, we could slot into a number of categories. The reason that we put business crime under communities, victims in communities, is because I'm very well aware that as a community, they feel that they have been neglected. And one of the issues very clearly that I also wanted to address through that was support for them and also engagement with them. So they could turn up in one of three categories. And we wanted to basically have a bit of balance within the plan. So that's why we put it there. It does not mean that we will not be looking at the crime figures for business crime. Let me reassure you about that.
Good. Thank you very much.
Okay.
There used to be a business PCC business forum, annual business forum, which was quite useful actually. You may wish to talk to your team about that and resurrect it.
Well, we are looking at the Safer Dorset Business Partnership, which may be that with knobs on, if I can put it that way.
In other words, yeah, okay. Thanks, Dave. Les, sorry.
No problems at all. Commissioner, a few things over the areas I'm working on. I'm working with our communities and very passionate about that, and also with fighting rural crime. And I'm not going to really challenge too much on those yet because you haven't been in post long enough to challenge, so to be fair, so more supportive.
I'm hoping you support as well as challenge, Les.
Absolutely. Now, a couple of things on rural crime. Are you including in your definition of rural crime things such as horticulture, where the theft of mowers and equipment, equestrian crime, where saddles can be very expensive and tack, and also other areas of rural crime such as alpacas, and I just widen that
Yes
remit.
is the answer, Les.
Perfect, thank you. And the measures of success indicators, when will you start to populate those, do you think?
Well, I think I said at the start of the plan presentation earlier that we've got a deep dive altogether on the training day in November. That's when I want to have the benchmarks buttoned down, a lot clearer than they are now. I'm hoping those moving parts will have been addressed. The one between me and the chief is probably easier. The one expecting to see what the national benchmark measures are. So I'm hoping that all that comes together, and then we as in me, the rest of the panel and the chair can sit down and say, is this fit for purpose? One of the things that we have to be careful of is what looks good, and have an agreement of what looks good.
Thank you. And there's a few other things you're obviously aware of, things like Farm Watch, Horse Watch, and Stop That Thief. So they may well become part of your plan in the measures of how successful the rural crime plan is, and also technology such as tracking devices and CCTV. You mentioned about increasing the rural crime team, which I absolutely welcome, as you might appreciate. Are you going to red circle those positions? Because, for example, I'm aware that at the moment you're about to lose one of your greatest assets in the rural crime team. And I'm also aware that on occasion, due to staffing difficulties, they get abstracted back to normal policing roles. Any thoughts on that, Commissioner?
Well, you're actually asking me about operational things within the remit of the Chief Constable. But I have made it very clear, I expect the rural crime team to be increased. I expect it to be double the size what it was before. I am aware of the situation that you are talking about. I'm hoping it is addressed and sorted regarding the individual person. So where I am is I'm expecting the rural crime team to be firstly doubled and then to be increased further.
That's absolutely fine.
If it's not, we'll be having robust conversations.
That's absolutely fine. Now I'm going to move on now to working with our communities. And one area that some of your colleagues will be aware that I was very passionate about is the Pan Dorset CCTV system. And there is an opportunity there potentially for income generation. You've got a brilliant system in Bournemouth. You've got a good system in Dorset Council, of which the PCC's office has funded some of it so far. I wonder whether there's an opportunity, and I don't expect an answer from you, to take it away, to look at it, because there are other organisations that also have CCTV, and there's an opportunity for income generation across all three public authorities there.
Well, that sounds interesting. I will basically have Julie look at it.
And Adam and Simon were aware of my work on that a few years ago.
Okay, I'll pick up and have a nosy.
The final point I want to make is around what Ian picked up about special constables and their rural crime. I'm absolutely passionate. The rural crime team do a fantastic job. Specials you could not do without them. They are a remarkable resource. But using a special constable to patrol rural areas is something that isn't particularly stimulating. They don't challenge their skills or develop their knowledge or expertise out there. So it's one to be aware of. The number of hours they do patrolling around may make them vulnerable because they don't have the skills, experience, knowledge to do the job when called upon in times of emergency. So just a word there for yourself.
Well, that's a good point, Les. I would expect my chief to be experienced enough to understand that. So we'll see where we go.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Les. George?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, two questions, if I may. The first one, again, relates to the scrutiny panels that have been set up by the office of your office of the Police and Crime Commissioner to assist the police in where some outside eyes to assist your office in the scrutiny of the police. I'd just like to say that I've enjoyed my time on the customer service improvement panel, and that I echo the letter of the chair of that panel, Stephen Fawn, to Superintendent Jared Parkin of the Force Command Control Centre. The simple reason for that is because it was an ideal opportunity of the office of the PCC to actually do that connection with members of the public that could actually contribute to their lived experiences on behalf of their communities, etc., to actually say, well, this is of concern to us. And particularly in Superintendent Parkin's case, he really grasped that. So I think that was a good example of the initiative to work together. My question is how's the recruiting going for the new panel, and when do they anticipate rolling out this scrutiny in whatever name it might actually come into being?
So my intention is to have it in place by Christmas. Regarding the recruitment, which is happening now, Simon, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, happy to. So the first instance, what we're trying to do is trying to approach our existing panel members from the previous panels, just to seek any expressions of interest to roll across into the new structure, recognising they won't necessarily at this stage know what that new structure is. So we're just working that through, and then we're just understanding whether or not we need to go out for external recruitment. We also, Councillor Farquhar, have held a reserve list for quite some time. So a number of colleagues have contacted us over the past few years, expressing an interest, and we're seeking to go to them in the first instance as well, just to make sure that we do take into account those views of colleagues who over the years have contacted us. So you will hear when we go to recruitment, we'll make sure that the panel are fully informed though.
Splendid, thank you very much. And if I may, Chair, it's been touched on before, Commissioner, that you talked about the scrap fly tipping scheme and your involvement in that. It's one of those ones that the word scrap triggered something else in my mind. We have incidents whereby we get hotspot crimes, and I'm talking about my local community here. A couple of years back, it was stealing the lead off people's porches, etc. Currently, as you are aware, then the hotspot crime is the stealing of catalytic converters from vehicles. Yeah. This is a great deal of concern to me, wearing the putting victims and the community first, in that because some of these incidents are actually happening in daylight hours as well as under the cover of darkness, is that the theft of property, particularly from a vehicle, that renders that vehicle inoperable, has a huge impact on that particular family, not just intrusion into their space, but also in perhaps they have care duties, work duties, getting the kids to school, a variety of bits and pieces. What plans do you have on putting the victim first to actually ensure that the Office of the Commissioner actually supports those victims in the actual impact, right, both practically and emotionally, and the community as well. Because if you look at the social media, catalytic converters, and I'm thinking around the lines of not just the support of those individuals that are reporting the crime just for the insurance claim, because that's not the way that this impact is. And unfortunately, it may come across as, well, here's your police crime number and all the best. The other factor is obviously there is a market for catalytic converters because of the valuable metals, etc., that are within them. So is there an opportunity for your office to actually look into the nature of that market and perhaps shutting it down or taking steps to actually to limit it? Because there is an example that I have seen on social media where people are actually advertising for scrap catalytic converters to actually be given to them so that they can process it appropriately. So the question is related to, one, the victims of this crime, because it's not just a crime against property, it's a crime against the individual and their entire lifestyle, whatever they be, and that support. And the second one, to actually where there's a demand, what action is there to take against the people that are actually processing these stolen goods?
Thank you, George. And just before we carry on, thank you for your work on the scrutiny panel. That's appreciated. The two issues that you talk about, the one about the, for want of a better word, the recipient of the catalytic converter after it's been pinched. That obviously is something which the force are pursuing. And in that context, I'm going to leave that one because that's very operational. I can assure you that that is not something which is neglected, however. Regarding what I can do regarding the Facebook lot, I don't think me telling them not to do that is going to have much effect, if I'm honest. But certainly the police will be looking at that angle, and I know they're looking at that angle specifically. The victim support is an interesting one, and I'm going to see if anybody in my team can shed light at the moment. If not, I'll take that one back, because it's a very specific question around a very specific offence. Oh, I think Simon's got some.
Yeah, happy to, Commissioner. So essentially, victim support is victim-led. So any victim of crime will be contacted by the force and offered support services. And it's essentially up to that victim whether or not they choose to engage with those services and to what extent they choose to engage with those services. So as you rightly say, Councillor Farquhar, some individuals may see, all I want is a crime reference number and I'm going to move on. Others actually, it may impact them quite significantly and they want that opportunity to engage services to help them with coping and recovering. And it's not down to the nature of the crime, it's down to the individual needs of the victim about what they need when they engage with that service. And so there'll be a hugely individually focused and differential service offered to individuals. It's up to them how much they want.
If I may, Chair, just a supplementary. So what exercise or what steps have been taken to actually collate and actually report on the number of victims of crime that actually take up the offer which is done? You said, because Simon said that it's victim-led, in proportion to the number of crimes reported. Because it's not a figure which I have top of my head, but it's just a question mark, is to say, is it good enough to say, if you need help, it's here, as opposed to actually collating that to see the reasons why people are not taking up that support, if indeed they're not. So I think perhaps there's a benchmarker there, which could actually look at the opportunity for the Commissioner, yourself, David, to actually benchmark your commitment to actually putting victims and communities first. Thoughts?
So that will be part of what we do in November, George, when we look at the benchmarking. But we receive reports on those issues, I'm sure. Simon, do you want to add any rich texture to that?
Yeah, so essentially, Councillor, we, as you know, the services provided by Victim Support, they provide a lot of services nationally for PCCs. The contract is run locally, so we're responsible for the delivery of that contract. Our victims lead engages with Victim Support on a monthly basis. We manage that contract, it's probably fair to say, quite tightly. There is a plethora of performance information that we receive on an ongoing basis, on a monthly basis from Victim Support, which goes down to quite a level of minutiae. So we have access to that on an ongoing basis, and we can also have the ability to engage with them on a more ad hoc basis to understand what improvements may or may not need to happen. So part of the large, long-scale contract we have with them, we are allowed to vary that contract, and if there are some emerging issues, we can turn up the volume level with regards to those, if that makes sense. So the contract itself is well managed by OPCC. I'm fairly comfortable that we have access to all the information we need in order to properly administer that contract and to raise any exceptions to the Commissioner.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, George. Bobby.
Thank you. I suppose part of scrutiny is also overview, because if there are things that are going well, it's worth mentioning so we don't lose that good practice. Otherwise, it's always negative. We look to try and change it, and then we end up losing some of the good stuff. So the threat, risk and harm regarding offenders, you're absolutely right. They are people at risk. They are people who are vulnerable. Not just dealing with what's in front of that police officer at the time, but looking at those long-term outcomes. Absolutely what's been needed for a really, really long time. Raised it with the last PCC, wasn't interested, badgered the OPCC, wasn't interested. I'm really glad at last someone is understanding. We've got people going into judicial systems they don't need to be doing. We need to help them. This is whole life-changing stuff. We're getting them off streets, we're getting them housed, they're not dependent on the benefit system, they're not in and out of prisons, they're not passing that lifestyle on to other children and future generations. So thank you so much for following that up. Incredible. It's breaking that chain. So important.
Absolutely right.
The 101 system, I know we talked it to death. Absolutely, we need to be looking at NEDs. We need to be looking online. Hampshire are doing it really well. Report it with us. We'll ring you back. And the reason it's so important we do that is because then it does free up the system for those who aren't online, and they can ring us and we can talk time to speak to the vulnerable. Scrap metal licenses, I'm guessing, is still in place in terms of cat thefts, etc. Maybe a campaign to do that. We used to do it when they were stealing copper from railway lines and stuff. Yeah. We just up that social media campaign again so people understand that you can't offload these stolen items. ASB. So okay, here comes the crux of my questions. So the funds for communities, ASB work, Pluscombe, Nova, Point, absolutely brilliant. Really love it. Within a couple of months, we were really beginning to see some positives coming out of that. Great partnership working. How has the community funding gone? Have we had some bids that we're going to be running with? And if not, are we going to be looking to extend that October the 4th deadline?
Well, the simple answer to that one is at this moment in time, we've still got a bit of time to run. So it's open until 4th of October. We've had 6 applications from across the county currently. Once it's closed, then we'll assess them and then they'll be passed to me for the final decision. Look, I'd encourage everybody to get their bid in. My office tell me that the majority of bids are received near the deadline. So that's fine. I get that. People want to spend as much time as possible drawing their bids together so it's the best bid possible in order to get in. Absolutely get that. But what I don't want is I don't want any communities or charities out there to miss out on the possibility of getting this funding. ASB, as I say, is one of the issues that we've got across the county which needs addressing. There are areas, I mentioned them earlier, some of the hotspot areas. For example, at this moment in time, I haven't had a bid in from Ashley Road, for example. which, it's one of those things, isn't it? But, it's there. It's there to be used. I want it to be used. Let's try and make this place better. So, yeah, absolutely. If there's anybody out there who's thinking, but they want to address ASB, get your bid in.
Cool, thank you. And my second one does go back to children. I was reassured in the HMICFRS report that Dorset police leaders are clearly committed to prioritising and improving child protection. We found evidence of good work by dedicated frontline officers, and in particular, the force is good at working with other organisations such as the council, schools, social care services in order to keep children safe. Now, there was a series of recommendations that came out of that with that 6-month deadline. How is that work stream going, please? And are there any challenges that you're concerned about?
Brilliant question. Absolutely on the button. Spookily, when that passed my desk, that was one of the things I addressed with the force straight away. The headline is that report, whilst it showed up some things, it was largely positive. But you're right, there was areas of work which we needed to improve, particularly in specific areas. So I'm required to formally respond to the HMIC FRS with my view on it and the actions Dorset Police have undertaken. That's within 56 days of the publication of the report. So that response is underway. So we're working very closely with the force to understand the details, scope and time frame for the delivery improvement plan. Subject to the update and action plan, we're going to get the HMIC FRS to come in to review process after 6 months. So I say, although this report preceded the start of my term of office, I'm content at this moment with the force's public response to that. And both the Chief Constable and I are basically going to get on with it and get it done. I had an informal update recently and they were very much on board with all of the recommendations going forward. Now, whether they can, whether we can say we've done them all within the 56 days, probably not. That's why we're talking about having them back. But we're all over it to make certain it happens. This is one area which I want to make certain we get absolutely right. Because if we protect those at-risk children, we prevent more problems down the line, just as you alluded to around ASB and other threats earlier.
Absolutely. So you do have a work stream that's coming out of it, and
yeah.
you're on track and
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've got to respond back on that work stream to the HMIC FRS within 56 days of the report.
Cool. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Bobby. Pete Barrow.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of brief comments, really. I appreciate it's early days. I think we've had a good update on the initial progress. I'm really looking forward to the 5th of October, developing some good benchmarks and understanding the KPIs. So that's all good. One other comment I'd like to make is David's made several references this morning to if you've got a problem, get in touch. And I'd just like to say thank him, really, because I recently sent him an incident which he's unpicked and got back to me, and I fed back to the resident concerned. So that was good because it wasn't easy and he was extremely upset. And just as a final thing, I really welcome the unrelenting focus on residents and the community that's coming across this morning. Really good to hear. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pete. Before we go on to the next item, Mark, can you put on the forward work plan, please? I'm really thinking about the recent IOPC report, which on use of taser, which I know wasn't held in high esteem by a multitude of agencies, but it did have some recommendations in it. Could you put on the forward work plan a review of PCC scrutiny panel for next year?
Yeah, we'll do, Chair.
Whatever name Dave and his team decide to give to it, I'd like us as a panel just to go over it to make sure it covers all the areas that we think we would like it to cover. I think it's probably now whether that it covers. I think it's the best way of putting it for the time being. Okay, Mark?
Yes, noted, Chair. Thanks.
Brilliant. Okay. Right, I'm going to draw that item to a close. Moving on swiftly to item 8, value for money of the uplift in additional officers in the 21 year. This is all part of the government's plan to recruit 20,000 police officers across the UK over a number of years. Dorset, to the best of my memory, has got something like 50 odd per year. They will give us the exact figures in a minute, what we're entitled to and where we are. And so we're seeking a sort of an assurance from the PCC that recruiting is on track for this uplift in police numbers. Dave.
Thank you, Chair. So there was a manifesto commitment to recruit an additional 20,000 police officers in England and Wales in the 3 years to the 31st of March 2023. So what's the Dorset position? Well, our starting point, our March 2020 baseline was 1,267 officers. And our target was to recruit 50 officers in year one. We achieved this target, recruiting an additional 52 to take our headcount up to a total of 1,319 officers as of March 2021. The target to recruit a further 50 officers during year two remains on track, as we have several officer recruitment routes open to candidates, but the main routes are for those joining without a degree. So that's via the PCDA Police Constable Degree Apprenticeship route on a 3-year course that enables students to gain a degree. Or they can join with a degree, where they join the degree holder entry program, which is a 2-year pathway. There's also a route open to transferees and rejoiners, and our positive action team has been able to restart face-to-face public engagement over the summer to highlight our vacancies right across our diverse communities. And that's something that I want us to passionately engage with and continue. I guess what's important, though, is how these are being utilised. So in terms of value for money, where are we going? Well, the fact is that all student officers, unless they're on the accelerated detective scheme, which Dorset has only recently launched, are placed into local policing roles. And that should happen around week 36 of their training, when they achieve independent patrol status. These roles are then protected within the local policing command for a period of 68 or 120 weeks, depending on whether students are on a 2 or 3 year route. And that allows them to gain operational competence before they're permitted to move elsewhere within the force. But of course, many of them will continue to work within those roles once confirmed in rank for many years. So whilst working within the local policing command, student officers will be under the guidance of training and development officers, who will continue to tutor, guide and support students to achieve full operational competence and ultimately be confirmed in rank, which is wonderful. So hopefully that provides members with a short overview of the police initial training process and the assurance that not only the vast majority of our new officers will spend significant periods of their training within local police commands, but significant numbers will also remain there for a prolonged period. Now, just on an aside note, I've seen some of these officers. I've been part of the initial meet, if you like, and indeed for the graduation of the ones recently. And I am very confident that we have a good bunch of new police officers coming through in Dorset who will add value to us in the ways that we want them to. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. I suppose the key point from the panel's perspective is how you as the PCC will ensure that this uplift meets your police and crime panel police and crime plan aspirations.
You are absolutely right, Mike. Look, let me add. In keeping with the views of the people at Dorset, which made it very clear to me what they wanted, then I've been very clear with the chief, the new chief, that the majority of the uplift needs to go into the visible policing areas, as we've discussed before. Now, I will be holding to him account through the ways that I do hold the Chief Constable to account. So, without going into all the detail, that includes weekly meetings.
No, we don't need the details.
It includes monthly
decision-making
meetings. And it also includes something called an annual appraisal. So, you know, it is not something I'm going to be letting go of. Let's put it that way.
All right. Okay, then moving on to questions from the panel, if I may. Ian.
Just to clarify, March 2021, then we had the force actually had 1,319 full-time equivalent officers in post.
Yep.
So the first question then is from your point of view, where have they gone then?
What you mean from the point of view of where
obviously the public was saying we want to see more police officers. I accept that we as the public sometimes don't get that if you want to put one person out 24 hours a day, it takes 6 people to do that. Economies of scale, if you want 10 more, it takes most probably about 15 people to do that because of abstractions, etc. Right. So it is not as easy as I'll give us another 20 on the visible policing, because 20 is not a lot of people to see, but there is a need for the public to say, yeah, okay, with those 50, I don't know, 30 of them went on local community teams and frontline, 2 went into cybercrime, 3 went into wherever they went.
Oh, okay.
And I'll do it by example, because
yeah. So that's
in
easy.
The period that the uplift came about, the only visible thing that I've seen from Dorset is that they've increased their chief superintendent rank by 1, which is the equivalent of 3 PCs.
So Ian, let's dial down the cynicism a little bit on this.
No, it's not. I'm just saying that. How is the PCC satisfying yourself that they're going to be that extra uplift and the public money is going into the places that the public have asked you for, but also that we as the public don't understand fully sometimes the risk behind the scenes, i.e. county lines and things like that, and the impact they can actually have.
Okay, well, look, this is an operational matter, but I'll be very clear that the establishment was raised in the local policing area by 44 officers as a result of the uplift. So 44 of the officers have gone direct to neighbourhood policing teams.
Which is excellent news, isn't it?
Yeah. Of the remaining 6 officers, you got an uplift of 3, which went to Alliance Operations Unit, and 3 additional supervisory roles were created, which you will understand that we need in order to make certain that everything works. So that clearly answers the question.
Yeah. And I mean, and because I think that was the point that we made. I know this is before your time, but when the uplift got mentioned, that was actually what we asked for, and that was what was agreed that would be given. And
I'm very clear.
Now we're getting it.
Yeah, and I'm very clear that that's where we need to go.
Yeah. Okay. So, and in terms of then officers leaving or outgoing, then, because obviously the trouble that every employer will have is that
absolutely
it's great,
right.
So let's bring all these in, but what about the loss, the other end, if retirement?
There's no point filling the bath if the plug's out. I absolutely get that. There's no point filling the bath if the plug's out.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right. So, in order to basically recognise that issue, the issue of officer turnover, I should reassure you that Dorset Police actually, in order to achieve that increase in establishment, actually recruited 90 officers.
And from your perspective, the PCC, I take it, are you happy now that that's the uplift is actually the uplift, and it's not, as you say, the plug is not being left out?
Yes, I am happy that the uplift is the uplift. The key issue now, Ian, which is what you will no doubt understand, is that this now delivers. You know, they're only just finishing their training. So it is from this autumn onwards, which is why I was very clear when I started my presentation around ASB and this summer. You know, there weren't extra officers out for this summer, and we still made certain that we got the ASB piece right and the crime right across the summer. So now we should be going forward with a much greater capability because of these new officers.
So do you see that obviously the summer activity, I assume, had to be done on overtime?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that looking ahead, the overtime usage would decrease.
Ian, you know I can't say that because it depends on the demand. If the demand goes through the roof,
I think the thing would be is that overtime is great, but it only has a certain lifetime before it affects absence rates and things like that, doesn't it?
Correct.
Which
Absolutely.
is why the uplift was part of the central government's thinking that we need to reduce that. Whereas
so if all things are equal, then the answer to your question is yes, I would.
Yeah, and obviously that I take that's something that you would do again through your regular management meetings, but also individually with the Chief Constable, as you alluded to there, appraisal time. Right,
yeah, okay. Absolutely.
That's me done, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. Sorry, caught me on the hop there. George, sorry.
Secretary Chair, I didn't mean to make you hop. My question follows on from Ian's question. I heard yourself, Commissioner, saying that 44 officers are direct to MPT, free for alliance units and free for supervisory, and also that you recruited 90 officers. The reason, my question relates to is when do we anticipate those officers will actually be up to speed, trained, and actually on the ground? The reason I asked that question because I had my local neighbourhood policing team that covers the ward had a public outreach event with the PCSO just to say, well, we're here for an hour on the street corner, come and chat to us. Speaking to their acting sergeant, then they're still looking forward to their colleagues from the uplift joining them. So my question really relates to can you give us an idea of the timetable where people are in their training, those which have successfully completed their training, because you say that we've recruited 90 officers, and when are the public actually going to see them visibly on the ground, particularly with the percentage that is going to the MPTs?
Well, again, I think where they're coming out and exactly when, I haven't got for you because I think that's primarily an operational matter at this moment in time. But I saw 25 on their final day of training a week and a half ago, which is why I'm saying it is this autumn that they will be coming forward. Now, what I haven't got, George, and I don't think it's appropriate for me to have and display, is the training and recruitment schedule for the whole of the force at this meeting, which is what you're actually asking for. It's up to me to make certain I'm happy with that with the Chief Constable, and I'm very happy to do that. Unless, Simon, have you got any extra insight?
I'm happy, Commissioner, just to reiterate the point that that you've mentioned earlier, which is that the Police Constable degree apprenticeship, which is the route the majority of new police officers joined the service, not just in Dorset, but the service overall, is a 3-year training programme. So essentially where we are is that officers will gain something called independent patrol status around week 36 of their training. And from that point, they go to something called the Probation and Development Unit. Essentially, they are working within communities, but they are also working alongside duty constables who help guide, support, advocate for them over the remainder of their training. So you will see student officers, but they are not fully fledged attested constables as yet. They are still within training. So from start to finish, it takes 3 years to train a police officer, 2 years if they join via the degree holder entry programme. And so obviously we're talking about individuals who have joined over the past year, so they are still relatively early on in their training process. And that's the nature of this uplift programme. Forces will recruit an additional 20,000 officers over the next 3 years, and those 20,000 won't necessarily hit the streets of up and down the country for a few years after that. So I think we can be clear about that. We're not necessarily going to be seeing 50 officers overnight. That's not, unfortunately, the way the police training works.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, George. Tony.
Yeah, are we happy with the retention of those we have recruited? And are there attempts made to, I'm trying to work out how best to put this, to ensure job satisfaction? I think you quoted earlier on about officers wanting to just get on and fight crime. And I think there's a lingering disappointment when, and you know, you quoted the figures, how long it took to deal with something, to establish that something was maybe not as urgent as it were implied, and then there was lots of paperwork that had to be done afterwards. And from a new recruit's point of view, that could be very disheartening. And I'm wondering whether there's any way of monitoring that, you know, someone being recruited to the force actually gets job satisfaction out of what they're doing. I know it's a little bit vague, but you know, it is something that sort of worries me.
Tony, what you're trying to identify is what actions are being taken in order to enhance job satisfaction.
I think that's probably a better way of putting it than my way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah. Dave, obviously, an area that really lies within Scott's regime, but if you could just give a short brief view.
It does very much lie within Scott's regime. This is all about officer well-being. It's all about all that sort of stuff. What I do know is that our retention levels are certainly on par with that across the country, and I actually think they're slightly better. Simon, can you comment on that?
I can, Commissioner. So the first thing I'd say is that the application process to become a police officer is very robust and very straightforward. So initially, when individuals contact the force, they speak to police officers who give them very much a warts and all view of policing. It is, if you hear them, the presentation is actually incredibly powerful. They will talk about the fantastic opportunity they have as a police officer, the self-actualization they have, but also the time spent away from their families, the personal commitment of time, and actually some of the difficulties in frankly engaging with members of the public, and some of the difficulty around process. We're very open and honest about that. And so actually, we are not trying to sugarcoat the role in any way, shape or form. The robustness of the application form and that process is really clear. And when we're very open, because we don't want anybody to drop out. We want people to know what they're getting into. We want them to have a good experience in training. We want them to be valuable members of the police family. So we do that initially and then all the way throughout that process as well. So there's really good support through the training team to make sure that we have got a really good understanding about issues that may or may not arise during training, and where the process can be improved. Colleagues will probably know that because obviously now that we're going down an apprenticeship scheme whereby individuals gain a degree, that training process is also subject to a degree of professionalisation around the academic side of it as well. So the police training, initial police training, is now subject to university oversight. So there's a huge raft of additional support available to police officers, to student officers, I should say, throughout the training process. But the final point I just make really quickly, Chair, is that I know that there is this sense that that police officers are hemorrhaging from the service. That just isn't true. So nationally, over the past years, in the run up to 2021, a little over 12,000 police officers joined the service, with a little over 6,000 leaving. So appreciate those numbers are, high, but essentially more people are joining than are leaving because the numbers are going up. So we just do need to recognise that.
Thanks, Simon. Dave, did you want to add anything to that at all? No.
David Taylor or David who? Sorry.
Yeah, I muted it because of a dog. So yes, only in the context that I've met a lot of the new recruits recently, and they're very aware that actually it was a very competitive situation for them to become police officers. What Simon says is absolutely right. We don't sugarcoat it. We didn't sugarcoat it. We're very clear what the role actually shows. And I'm very pleased with the way that they are basically turning out at this moment in time, both those who have come out recently, those who have just started. When I say come out, I mean moved out into the community as part of their training, and those who are basically newbies. Look, well-being is something which is within Scott's purview, but it is something which is on my agenda to ask him about on a regular basis. And that, that as I see it is
and ultimately, we as a panel have supported and scrutinised the PCC to ensure that he is scrutinising the police to ensure they're looking after themselves. You know, we are where we are. So moving swiftly on, Mark Howell.
Yes, I don't have any questions on this issue. Thank you.
Pete Barrow?
No, nothing to add, Chair.
Yeah. Les, are you still here?
I'm still here, Chair. I think my question's been answered in various guises. The one I was going to ask, I think that's been answered satisfactorily, so I won't prolong it any longer. But thank you.
Thanks very much, Les. And I'm glad that your points have been covered as well. Dave Taylor.
You pulled it back together very well. Thank you very much. A lot of the questions was in the detail of Simon and David. Thank you very much for that. It's reassuring to know that you are looking at it and it is being observed, and we're going forward, which is good news. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave. Meg?
I have nothing further. I just wanted to hear what the progress was, and that's all been covered. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Sherry?
Just very briefly, Mr. Chairman, through you, this is a very encouraging story that we're hearing here. So thank you very much for that. I wonder if, this is not necessarily a question that we need addressed now, but there's a challenge here then conveying this good news story to the public. We talk about, you talk about 25 officers recently progressing to the next stage in their recruitment. We're not necessarily sharing that information with the public at large. It's known to the people who are in the inner circle. Could we give some thought about how we're telling the public that we're spending their money on new officers and that this is actually working and where these new officers are going? Because I think that would be an extremely beneficial thing to do. Thank you.
While Dave's on mute, I totally agree with that. It's a good point, actually, Sherry.
Yeah, so I was going to say I totally agree with that, and yes, it will be, and we will announce them at the most correct time that we can.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bobby?
Thank you. No, David Taylor has echoed lots of what I was saying. I thank you, and I'm really glad that you're on the ball with this.
Yeah, thank you. Ian, you've got a point?
Yeah, it was just a point of clarification. Unless I misunderstood it, at 36 weeks, the officers themselves are being utilised to do work primarily in their on their posting on the response or intervention. I don't know what the word is. So they are actually available earlier than they're actually dealing with work with the public after 36 weeks, aren't they? So
yeah.
Because it was just slightly misleading there. It sounded like we were going to be, it's 2 or 3 years. It's not.
No. It's 36 weeks from the start of their training.
It's 36, and then that they're actually entrusted, obviously if they're successful at 36 weeks, to do work on behalf of of the police service.
Absolutely.
Serving the public. Yeah, I just thought because I think it was a bit of confusion there, or it might have been the way I was listening to it.
No, Ian, you're absolutely right. That's correct.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Mark, we need to do this extending the meeting malarkey?
I think that's probably sensible, Chair, because there's still some items to go, isn't there?
Yep.
Essentially, looks like we're going to go beyond the 3 hours that we've got permitted as it stands for the committee. So really, before we can go beyond that, we just need member agreement really to extend beyond that 3 hours. So again, we'd be looking for a proposer and a seconder, and then just to make sure there's no objections to that.
Am I allowed to propose?
It's probably better if it's independent.
My learned colleagues are on the screen. I'll let them talk.
Okay, so I'm not phoning the doctors at this point, so I'm sorry about earlier. Yeah, can I propose that we extend the meeting, please?
And I'm happy to second, Chair, but could I also request that maybe we have a 5-minute break?
Yes.
Before the next item, please.
No.
All right.
It is currently, according to my excellent machine here, 12:49. If I could ask everyone to rejoin at 12:55. We've got item 9, which is the next big chunk, and then we're virtually finished. So 12:55 then, please, players. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair.
Right, well, welcome back, everyone. We're now moving swiftly on to item 9, Innovation Fund Review. This fell out from, we did a review, or did the same subject this time last year, and the panel had slight concerns about the Innovation Fund Review, or the Innovation Fund, being used for staff posts and how this would, and also procurement of equipment, and how this would then move into the funding for this, move into the actual program or be programmed for the future. So in other words, the staff costs would remain as they are, and the equipment costs would there'd be requirements for maintenance, calibration, and repair. So hand over to Dave for this one. Thank you.
It's actually Simon who's going to talk about this one, Mike.
Yeah, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. Chair, as you know, but just to remind new members and for the benefit of the public, as part of the 2019-2020 precept, the former PCC and Chief Constable agreed that an innovation fund should be created. And they did this recognising the importance of innovation to the continued success of the force and to ensure that we kept at the forefront of new ideas and opportunities for improving service delivery to the public. The Innovation Fund itself is managed through the Innovation Board, which meets every 6 weeks and is jointly chaired by the Deputy Chief Constable and myself, who have full financial delegation from the Chief and the PCC respectively. Chair, when I previously updated members on this, it was June last year, I mentioned the work underway with the College of Policing to embed and promote idea generation and problem solving throughout forces. This work has continued, and in February of this year, we formally launched the Dorset Innovation and Evidence-Based Policing Hub, which is an electronic platform that sits on Microsoft Teams and our intranet. And the benefit of this is that it enables any member of staff to access the hub via any force-issued smart device. That means that staff can now submit an idea, offer feedback, or any advice and support of existing ideas through the hub. And this move to a fully electronic platform has really allowed us to open up the process. It means that anybody, wherever they are, can look at ideas that have been posted, can add in their own comments, can add in ideas that they may have seen elsewhere. We can also add in documents, web links, videos, all other kinds of media can be attached to ideas, which should help our understanding and our engagement. Also to help the innovators themselves, so the people who come up with these ideas, we have now highlighted a few priority areas of innovation, which I've listed in paragraph 1.4. And these focus on processes, on vulnerability, on our people, on some specific enduring challenges that police forces have, and also about exploiting our technology for maximum effect. We've also, to support the launch of the hub, we've also produced and launched a short internal video, which highlights how colleagues can access the hub, and which also contains a number of testimonials from previous innovators whose ideas have been supported by funding. Since the implementation of this new system, which, as I say, was in February of this year, 25 ideas have been submitted to the hub, and each one's being assessed and tested to ensure it's new, it's achievable, and will realise the intended aims before it's formally presented to us as a board. This is a reduction on the first year's activity when over 100 ideas were received, but as you would expect, this is due to the pandemic. As policing activity over the last several months has really been focused on meeting those demands, and our innovation has very much been focused and concentrated around rapidly delivering new ways of working. So that is things like the accelerated rollouts of laptops and other smart devices, the accelerated rollout of the Microsoft Office 365 platform, and the provision of additional monitors and webcams and mice and keyboards and things like that to manage remote and home working. And all that's been supported by a lot of work that's been done behind the scenes to, and forgive the non-technical term, but to kind of strengthen our network backbone to manage this significant additional load of video-enabled meetings and all the other ad hoc electronic communication that we're now utilising. So most of that innovation was managed through our COVID-19 command structures rather than by the Innovation Board itself. So a lot of ideas weren't rooted and have been included in the hub. So important though to recognise that even though the number of ideas coming through the hub itself have reduced, that the culture of innovation that was fostered by the Innovation Board has really proved invaluable during this period and really helped us come up with some good ideas that we've implemented through the COVID-19 structures. Chair, just in terms of the finances, and as I've mentioned, because the number of bids were slightly reduced, we've funded £195,000 worth of funding in 2020-2021, which left a total of around £337,000, which has been carried forward into the Innovation Fund for 2021-22. Chair, as usual, I've included several highlights there for members' awareness, which start at paragraph 3.5. I'll just, if I may, pick out a couple of those very quickly. The first being an example of new technology, and the second being an example of partnership working. So the technology example is Good Sam, which is a communications platform. This was originally created by a group of clinicians who are based in London to improve the response to those suffering a cardiac arrest. And over the past several years, this platform has grown considerably and is now quite tightly integrated into the NHS comm system, with those tools being used to manage emergency deployment across ambulance trusts, and also, for example, to manage the, I think it's circa 750,000 NHS volunteers who've supported health services during the pandemic. Over that time, the system has also had a growing number of usage from other emergency services, notably the police, and we are currently trialling it from our control room. And what this does, it allows officers and staff based in the control room to view live video streams from incidents by members of the public who call into the control room, sharing the feed from their mobile phone camera to the force control room. This system also provides real-time location data, which obviously aids deployment significantly, and enables us to securely record and save the video and audio from those incidents for evidential use. So this is currently being trialled at the moment. The trial completes in November, and early results are very promising, but obviously I don't want to prejudge the outcome of the review, but it's probably fair to say that the expectation is for the system to become more widely implemented following that review. And then our partnership working example, Chair, is the mental health triage vehicle, which is a joint innovation by Dorset Police, the Dorset Mental Health Service, and the South Western Ambulance Service Trust. So these agencies committed to a 15-week trial in which a vehicle was jointly crewed by a mix of a mental health practitioner, a paramedic, and a police officer, and operated in peak times across the BCP conurbation. The evaluation of that trial found a range of positive results, which really were actually quite supportive. So they included a 40% reduction in the use of Section 136 of the Mental Health Act. So those are where individuals are safeguarded by placing them into police detention. It was also noted that by having a mental health practitioner on scene, police officers could easily hand over to them more quickly once the potential danger to the individual and to the member of the public had been assessed, thereby freeing up their time for other work. As a result, all of the agencies involved have committed to extend this service until March 2022, which is fantastic. And as I say, Chair, there are some other examples included in the paper for members' awareness, but just really wanted to close by just saying that we are really very clear that the Innovation Board and the Innovation Fund remain a tremendously useful endeavour. The work has spearheaded the embedding of innovation and problem solving across the force. It's provided opportunities for staff at all levels to identify new and innovative ways of working. And now, as I believe I said last year, and I'll reiterate now, Dorset has really been a vanguard amongst this. And now other forces are starting to come into us and see and copy what we're doing. Most recently, Devon and Cornwall have set up their innovation hub, which is exactly modelled on ours. And this has really been a benefit as well, because it allows us and our officers who are engaged in innovation to share their best practice, to share the positive experience of Dorset to date. And that really helps us drive forward and continue to drive forward our own innovation. Thank you, Chair. Hope that's helpful, and obviously happy to take any questions.
Yeah, outstanding. Thanks, Simon. And I fully get the Section 136 element, because it enables the mental health practitioner to triage the patient there and then on the spot, rather than police officers being taken away from their main effort, their main duty, by escorting the person to a hospital or police detention. So I think that's a really good idea you've got there. I think it was from the panel's perspective, it was the concept that, or the idea that the innovation funds the concept, the acquisition, and the deployment of the idea, but it was the actual how is the in-service element, how is the funding for that programmed?
Yeah, good question, Chair. So essentially, we're really clear that the Innovation Fund is used to pump prime ideas, not to sustain them. It's the expectation of the board that when colleagues come through with ideas, they should demonstrate their long-term benefit to the organisation well before the end of the bid period, which allows for longer-term funding routes to be identified. So the board requires the evaluation of each funded bid, and part of that includes a sustainability plan and a really clear articulation around the delivered benefits of the innovation. Practically, Chair, the Deputy Chief Constable is the co-chair of the Innovation Board and of the Workforce Management Board. So the Workforce Management Board is the board that it's not a force, it's not an OPCC board. We don't apply. It's a force board, but that's the board that makes decisions about what roles will be funded within the force. So the DEP sits across both boards, so has a really good understanding of the innovation that's coming through and of the relative merits of those ideas, and also sits across the Workforce Management Board, so can actually make those decisions and take them from innovation into long-term mainstream funding, should that be the decision.
Yeah, no, you're using the key word I couldn't remember, as demonstration. So the Innovation Fund does the concept, acquisition and demonstration, and then you move it over to the in-service element if it's deemed suitable, and identify the funding in order to do that. I'm going to leave it there because I've spent more than enough time, my panel's time on this. Les, I can see you're still here. Any points?
No, I've got no questions. I think the Innovation Fund is absolutely brilliant. It's an opportunity for members, officers, staff who have a good idea to bring it forward, to feel empowered within the organisation to make a difference. Fully supportive of everything I've seen here. I think it's really good. I'm also pleased to hear Simon's comments about taking the idea forward and fully funding if it becomes an idea worthwhile taking forward. So, no, really good. Thank you. No other points.
Thanks, Les. Sherry.
No, it's an excellent initiative and I'm very pleased to hear about it. No questions.
Mark?
Yeah, I echo all those comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. David Taylor?
Thank you very much for an excellent report. As you know, my observations on adult and children's services is quite keen, shall we say, and I'm pleased to say that the mental health triage vehicle is a vehicle which can be used to encapsulate those problems that we have with adult and children's services as well. My question would be to say, are you engaging with the adult and children's services of Dorset Council as well, so that they understand when these people come across to them that they're being looked after and safeguarded in some way? Because I can see it being involved in a dual process, and this means about communication being paramount across the Dorset County. Is that clear?
Yes, so I think the interplay and the interaction between the different statutory agencies is a really key point here, and this is why I picked out that particular example of partnership working. We recognise that quite often the police is the emergency service of quite often first and last resort. Yeah. So, but actually, police officers may not necessarily be the right and most appropriate service for those individuals who might happen to be in a mental health crisis. So initially there is the safeguarding around what happens there and then on the street, but the idea is that hopefully with the interaction of both the paramedic and the mental health service, there is the opportunity then to move into liaison and diversity and diversion services as well, which can actually pick up the crisis care element, ensure people don't go into police custody and they do go to other approved mental health or health-based places of safety. And then the liaison and diversion services should pick up through local public health. So yes, the idea is that hopefully all of those referral pathways should be really, really clearly signposted and linked.
Perfect report, and thank you very much. Absolutely outstanding. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. George.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd just like to ask is that close to my ward and close to my heart is an organisation called Vita Nova. They're a charity that actually work with those that are on the road to recovery from abuse, and also those that are on probation and on after prison. I forget the term for a moment. Rehabilitation? No. So very interested about this innovation plan. What is the Commissioner's view on charities that actually work with those that are in recovery and those that have maybe committed because of their addictions, ASB behaviour before, to actually apply for this funding, and what advice would you give them to have the best success on their application?
Thank you, George. I think that's a question about the Operation Relentless Community Fund for reducing ASB, rather than the Innovation Board. So let me just address it. The key thing is that it can't be a local authority. It's got to be a charity or a community group. That's the first point. The second point is it has to have outcomes which are deliverable. So if it's a warm and fluffy bid, it's got less chance of being approved. If it can demonstrably show that it will reduce antisocial behaviour, and presumably in a geography, which is your geography by the sound of it, then of course it will be looked upon favourably.
Thank you, Chair, for my indulgence, and thank you, David, for your indulgence as well.
Thanks, George. Ian.
Nothing from me. Just thank you to Simon and the office for the report. I think you judged by the standard report. There's no questions because it's covered it all there.
Yeah, that's good. Tony.
Yeah, I think, and really referring back to George's question, I think the Innovations Board and grants to various organisations are related to a certain extent, and I wonder whether, because there was a question earlier on about the maintaining new innovative ideas, and I wonder whether we should have a report prior to the budget setting meeting, maybe in the December meeting, where we can be told what has been looked for, what has been successful, and so that we can consider as part of our the way forward certain types of funding being made permanent. You know, I do think that I think it's a good idea, and we need to make sure that if anything comes out of it, that it's kept going. And there needs to be a process perhaps to let us assess how things are progressing and whether or not these ought to become part of the base budget.
I think it's a very valid point you've made there, Tony. And we will put this onto the forward work plan to review it again next year, and taking into consideration what you just outlined there, really looking back, what's been successful, and how has it been effective once it's actually in service, if that makes sense. Does that sort of satisfy you, Tony?
Yeah, I think that's basically what I'm sort of looking for, because you know, it's great having something like this, and you know that good ideas come out of it, but you know it needs to be shared, and we need to look at how it can be made sustainable long term.
Yeah, excellent. May?
Thank you, Chair. I really welcome this paper. It's got some really, really positive things in it, particularly the mental health vehicle. I think Tony has already covered what I was going to say, which was I clocked that the funding's been extended to March 2022, and obviously the obvious question was what happens thereafter, because clearly from the results so far it is actually having a very positive effect. I just wanted to touch on the live streaming, the Good Sam, again an excellent initiative, but just wondering whether members of the public or the community are actually aware that they can do this, because obviously I know certainly, and I don't mean to be particular to the ward I represent, but we've had instances where people have captured footage on their mobile phones and then posted it on social media, and in reality if they'd actually contacted the police and then via this initiative been able to actually share the footage with the police, there might have been a slightly different outcome. So I guess that's my only question here, but really, really welcome this paper.
Thanks, mate.
Sorry, Chair, if I could just jump in for a sec there, just so just to reiterate, or just to clarify. So in terms of footage that has been picked up and that may sit on, for example, a dash cam or a CCTV doorbell or something similar to that, then the facility to send that information through to the force exists through something called Operation Snap. So that initially started with regards to dash cam footage. It has now been, it's largely focusing on driving incidents, and we're hoping to be able to extend that to other aspects of antisocial behaviour and crime as well. But essentially, the Operation Snap dashcam footage that exists and has done for quite some time. The Good Sam is live video streaming. So the way it works is that if I contact Dorset Police on 101 or more than likely 999 to say that a live incident, then what can happen is if the operator says, well, are you able to can you view it from a safe location, and are you happy to share that information with us? Then the operator will then send a link down to the individual, who then clicks a button, and then through the app, that video is then shared with the control room. So it's not something which is, it's done something which is managed by the control room. It's not necessarily members of the public aren't able to access Good Sam themselves, if that makes sense.
You know, that's helpful, Chair. And I guess the point I was getting to was that I think if members of the public are aware that when they phone emergency, they are potentially able to actually provide evidence, video evidence of an incident occurring. I have a feeling a lot of people aren't aware of it. But yeah. I mean, it's a brilliant, it's actually a really great initiative.
Yeah, so still in the trial phase at the moment. And so obviously once we complete the trial phase, which will finish in November, and a decision is made about whether or not it will be rolled out more broadly, then that will be the time, Councillor Haynes, when the force will do some quite significant communication to the public around that.
Right, I welcome that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, May. Finally, Bobby.
Hi, love this. Love it a lot. It's really good stuff. I'm just wondering, because now it's being rolled out a bit more wider, what we're doing in terms of looking at what other forces are bringing to their versions of the innovation boards, and how we are going to start to nick some of their ideas as well.
So if I can say a couple of things about that. I've been trying to nick ideas off of every PCC who I've come across for the last 3.5 years, and I'll continue to do that. The Association of Police and Crime Commissioners are just actually recruiting for somebody who will share best practice amongst us. So we've got some mechanisms in place in order to do that from the point of view of the PCC. Simon, do you want to talk about how the force do it?
Yep, happy to, Chair. So, sorry, Commissioner Even. The where we are is that the Culture Policing is sponsoring an innovation broker programme, which is basically to identify an innovation lead within each force, and then for those brokers, those knowledge brokers, to come together on an occasional basis to share ideas, best practice and the like. It's essentially where our idea for an innovation hub was presented. We presented that to, Dorset Police presented that to the Culture Policing Innovation Brokers last year, hence why it's been picked up by a number of other forces. So that's essentially where we are. At the moment, it's probably fair to say that we are ahead of the curve compared to other forces, but I'm sure there will be some really good ideas coming through other forces which we can borrow with pride in due course.
Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. That's all, Chair.
Thanks, Bobby. And thank you, Simon, and thank you for your excellent Freudian slip there. Moving swiftly on to item 10, complaints update. Ian.
You'll be pleased to know, Chair, there's none.
I'm sure the PCC will be pleased to know as well.
Well, yeah, I suppose so, and the PCC, but there is none.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Moving swiftly on then again, item 11, work plan, forward work plan. Mark, please.
I mean, it's a very comprehensive and detailed work plan circulated with the agenda. I think it's probably fair to say that December's agenda already looks quite challenging, and we've added some further items today for consideration at different panel meetings. I think we probably may want to look at reallocating some items outside of this meeting, Chair.
Thank you for that, Mark. Can you put that on the agenda for the, well, it is already on the agenda for the training day in November, and the panel and the OPCC and the PCC will work through the forward work plan in order to smooth out the bow wave of stuff that we've got coming due to this meeting. I also noticed before we close that in the national media, the PCC, Dave, you've started an estates review as well. No comments on that now, but it'd be useful in the future if we could have an update on where we are, only a quick verbal update on where we are. We'll put that down as an action probably for the next meeting. Again, no need to talk about it here. We're aware of it. As I say, it's in the national media. It'll be interesting to know what the outcomes are and what your aspirations are in the future. I'm looking at item 12. We have no urgent items. Item 13, we have no exempt business. I'm looking down all panel members. I don't see any red hands. If anybody wishes to ask a final point, final question. No, I can't see anything at the moment. Can I thank all panel members for attending and their excellent input? I'll also, obviously, can I thank you, Dave, for your input, and more importantly, but equally as important, the lads and lasses in your office for the excellent work they've done in supporting our work in supporting you and your scrutiny. It's a bit of a yin and yang situation, if you remember the slide. Right, on that high note then, chaps, I'm going to close this meeting down. I look forward to seeing priority leads in Wimprith in October, training day in November, and our next formal meeting, which may be formal or informal, yet to be determined by Dorset Council in December. Right, on that high note then, I'm now going to close this meeting. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you ever so much. Goodbye.
Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you.